We'll have time for some questions about the events over the course of the day after the briefing, but I do want to just finally note, at 3:45 today, NEMA issued a cancellation of the tsunami warnings across the country. That means now that people can return home. I guess we say this with one note of caution. Whilst there is no longer the restrictions on being able to go down into the beach, please do exercise prudent judgment. We are asking people still to take care. So I'll leave the rest to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Minister Allen, and we'll bring Minister Allen up at the conclusion of the COVID briefing. I'll now ask Dr. Bloomfield to take the stage. This morning I spoke with President Macron of France. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss progress in the forward agenda for the Christchurch call ahead of the 2-year anniversary of the March 15 terror attacks. But as you can imagine, international calls at present inevitably turn to COVID-19. It reminded me of what those in other countries are going through. Yesterday alone, I'm advised there were 26,788 new cases reported in France and 322 deaths. I know here in New Zealand we take none of what we have for granted, not least because so many of us know people or have people that we love abroad. And while I absolutely maintain that our strategy of elimination is best for us, that does not make it easy. This week I received a letter from a mum who was distraught that she had to tell her daughter there would be no school camp. And that sits alongside stories of job loss and hardship, of small businesses, hospitality outlets and tourism operators feeling the effects of another setback. COVID has taken a toll on so many in so many ways. But it will get better. Over the next few weeks, I'll set out more of a roadmap for what the year ahead looks like for Aotearoa and how vaccines will affect our elimination strategy, particularly as we get more certainty around vaccine delivery. But until then, we have some cases to recap and important decisions on alert levels to make. A brief reminder of how we got to where we are today. On Valentine's Day, we learnt of 2 COVID cases in a family in Auckland, the origin of which at that point was unknown. Cabinet, with the advice from Health, moved Auckland into level 3 for 3 days and the rest of the country to level 2, while we worked to gather a complete picture of the infection and spread. Within 3 days, we were confident our response was the right one. We had cases in the community, but they were manageable via contact tracing and testing procedures, and we knew there wasn't widespread transmission. Because we're dealing with the uncertainty of the more transmissible UK strain, we were more cautious, treating more people as if they were close contacts. As a result, we came out of those higher alert levels after a short, sharp 3 days. 10 days later, on Saturday 27th, a new case emerged that we could not immediately link. The position Cabinet found itself in last Saturday was fairly clear-cut. There was no immediate link for the new case, and even if there had been, there were a large number of exposure events which posed a significant risk of spread. So ministers once again opted for the cautious approach that has served New Zealand so well. Since that time, 50,239 COVID tests have been carried out. Importantly, a significant proportion of those tests have been in Auckland. Thank you to everyone who got a test over the past week. It's only by doing so that we know whether we have COVID more widely in the community. Meanwhile, since Valentine's Day, in relation to the cluster of 15 cases, we have identified and managed roughly 6,000 contacts. We've genomically linked all 15 cases, which means we're confident there is just one cluster. We've carried out regular wastewater testing at key sites, the results of which have all been negative, with the exception of the site near the jet park, which you would expect to test positive. And since February 14th, we've seen a 58% jump in the use of the COVID Tracer app across the country. We just need to keep that number up. That's a massive credit to everyone and a hugely important contribution to our contact tracing efforts should we need them if we have a positive case. There have been no new cases for 5 days in a row. That is good news, especially when we are dealing with what I can only describe as an unpredictable variant of COVID-19, one that everyone has been wise to be cautious of. Level 3 provided us with an extra layer of security while we addressed the unknowns and reduced risk. On the basis that we've found no new cases beyond household members, we've had excellent testing numbers, and that close contacts continue to be managed, Cabinet has made the decision to move Auckland to Alert Level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday, and the rest of New Zealand to Level 1 at 6 a.m. on Sunday. So that brings us to the conclusion of the 7 days that we set out from the very beginning. Cabinet will review this decision at the end of next week with a view to moving Auckland to Level 1 at the start of the weekend if we are in a position to do so. This plan is consistent with our cautious and careful elimination strategy. Now, being at Level 2 for this period will carry us through to roughly 14 days since the infectious period for our last cases in the community. There is, of course, a chance that we'll see additional cases, and that's why we continue to place requirements on those who still need to be in isolation. And it's also why we are at Level 2 in Auckland. Although compared to Level 3, Level 2 feels more like normal life, it is still not business as usual. Please keep your distance from other people when out in public, including on public transport. And if you can't maintain a physical distance of 2 metres, we do encourage you to carry a face mask or face covering with you. If you are sick, stay at home. Don't go to work or school, and don't socialise. This protects you and it protects your whānau. If you have symptoms of a cold or flu nature, if you have aches and pains, call your doctor or healthline and get a test. And keep track of where you've been at all times. We know that gatherings pose the biggest risk of spread, so there can be no more than 100 people at social events, including weddings, birthdays, funerals, tangis, and other church services. So just a reminder, we're moving to Level 2 on a Sunday morning. The restriction on 100 will apply to church services. Businesses can reopen but must follow public health rules, including physical distancing, record keeping, and the cap on 100 people. Hospitality venues can open but must apply those 3 S's. You'll remember that we asked people to be seated, single servers, and having people spaced between tables. For any other Level 2 reminders, please visit covid19.govt.nz. Finally, we may not be in the devastating position that much of the rest of the world finds itself in, but an elimination strategy can still feel like hard work, and it is completely natural to feel fatigued. COVID is hard work for everyone. Thank you for pushing through once again, and we are confident that we will once again get ourselves back to a position we have the freedoms New Zealand has so enjoyed. Dr. Bloomfield.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Kia ora koutou katoa. So, as the Prime Minister has mentioned, there are no new positive COVID-19 cases in the community for the 5th day in a row. There are also no positive cases in managed isolation to report today. Over the past few weeks, roughly 6,000 people connected to this February cluster have been contacted by staff from Auckland Regional Public Health Service, our public health units around the country, or our National Contact Tracing Centre staff. They've been provided with advice and information on testing and self-isolation. Many of these people have been followed up on a daily basis and their testing results carefully matched to support our control of this outbreak. This is an incredible effort, and I would like to acknowledge the hard work of our public health, our contact tracing teams, and our healthline staff, who have been putting in very long hours and have scaled up the approach in response to this more transmissible variant. Local public health officials, contact tracers and interpreters have also worked closely with other agencies and organisations to provide outreach and support to communities and individuals, including those from different ethnic and language backgrounds. Remarkable and rapid progress has been made, and we would like to acknowledge and thank in particular the Papatoetoe High School community. All of the outstanding Papatoetoe students have been contacted and retested, and all have returned negative results. There are 2 students who are in isolation because they were unwilling to get a test. They are being carefully followed up by and supported by public health officials. Despite the decision to lower the alert levels on Sunday, as the Prime Minister has said, we want people who are unwell to continue to be tested wherever you are in the country. It is possible we may still get positive results from some of the contacts who remain in isolation and are still to have day 12 tests. It's important to note these people do remain in isolation a positive test result does not present a risk to the wider community. Our contact tracing and public health staff are in contact with them daily. As we move down alert levels this weekend, some people, as I said, will still be required to remain in isolation and or be tested. To underscore the importance of them following the advice they have been given by the Public Health Unit or by our contact tracing team, I am issuing a direction under Section 70 of the Health Act 1956 that applies to the following people. Any person who attended the City Fitness Gym at Hunters Plaza at 217 Great South Road, Papatoetoe in Auckland on the 20th of February 2021 between 11:15am and 1:45pm, or on the 26th of February 2021 between 3:25pm and 4:30pm. As well, any other person who has already been contacted by Auckland Regional Public Health Service or our contact tracing teams and advised they are a close plus, a close or a casual plus contact during this outbreak, and who is still required to isolate and or be tested, to comply with the following instructions. I require them to do three things. To isolate at their usual home, first. Second, to report for and undergo medical testing for COVID-19 at a time and place specified by a medical officer of health. And third, except as required to undergo such testing, to remain isolated until they receive further direction from a medical officer of health. Now, a Section 70 order enables an authorised medical officer of health to require those, in order to meet public health requirements, to undergo testing, to isolate until they receive their results. It also enables those affected to be visited immediately at their homes or at work by public health officials. Anytime a person receives a direction from a medical officer of health, they must comply with it. And of course, public health officials will also discuss with these people the support that they require and which is available to help them meet these requirements. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Bloomfield. Happy to take questions. Jessica.
Prime Minister, if you're comfortable with the 0 cases over 5 days and the fact that there are these extra restrictions on people who went to the gym, why not go to level 2 for Auckland at midnight tonight?
Look, a good question. One of the things, of course, that we have kept in mind all the way through is that we still actually have the remainder of a transmission cycle. And so our judgment has been that actually that full 7 days, that gives the chance of the majority of any positive infections to be manifest. The second half, you're always less likely to see them in that latter part, but we still want some level of restriction and caution in place if we are in a position where we identify cases in that period. So there's always a judgment there. In our view, sticking with that full 7 days was the wise approach to take.
We're still waiting for those 74 tests back yesterday. How many of those have come back and are included in those 0 new cases?
Dr. Bloomfield.
So the vast majority, there are still around 10 people who we don't have results back yet from the original gym visit on the 20th of February and the following one on the 26th of February. 8 of those people have either had tests or are in the process of being tested today. They have all been in regular daily contact and have been isolating. There are just 2 people who our finding services have been unable to find through remote contact. The police and customs don't have other contact details for them. So the teams are on the ground just looking for those 2 people.
I think on those last 2, Dr. Bloomfield reminded Cabinet this afternoon that those 2 are from the visit on the 20th of February rather than the later visit.
Yes.
And so I understand that
so
gives
the
a
earlier
different...
visit is one we're less concerned about because it was before the person became symptomatic. So what I can say is all the people from that visit on the 26th of February, which was last Friday afternoon, have either been tested or the team is out there testing them now and they are in isolation.
Dr. Bloomfield, perhaps you'd want to speak to what's going to happen with the 2 people from the 20th that we've been working hard to find.
So they will be found and they will be isolated and tested, and they will remain isolated until they receive their test result.
The response
Gina.
this time with the Section 70 Health Act, was that because the communications weren't clear last time and they are crystal clear this time?
Well, actually, the one thing I would add is that in the stand-up last time, there were references to different people being treated differently through alert levels. But I'll let Dr. Bloomfield.
So, yes, it does make it very crystal clear to everybody, including everyone listening, that there is a formal legal requirement for people to do as requested. What I should say is that it's also just as we move down from alert level 3 to 2, where people are staying at home anyway under alert level 3, it's just to make sure there is a specific legal requirement for those people who are still required to be at home to remain
Let's be fair, of course, we never make an assumption that everyone affected by Section 70 is tuning in immediately for every press conference. So this is one thing we can do. That doesn't take away from the obligation for us to try and get that communication out in as many ways as possible.
Can we expect to see more Section 70 orders if there are further outbreaks earlier on in the...
I'll have Dr. Bloomfield. It's not this idea that we can only require someone to do something if there's a Section 70 isn't quite right. So I'll have Dr. Bloomfield explain his powers.
Yes, and I was discussing this with the Solicitor General earlier today. Thank you.
Just stick with the legal ones. There's many you could choose to speak to, of course.
Here's the key point. Actually, as I've said the last few days, the medical officers of health and indeed health protection officers are designated officers under the Health Act. I actually give them their designation. So they have powers that they can use. But the vast majority of work carried out by our public health units, whether it relates to pandemic response or a foodborne illness outbreak, they do, because they have those delegated powers. If they need to, they can use Section 70 to require people to do things. That doesn't even need to be a written gazetted notice. It just simply saying it to someone under Section 70, I require you to do these things, provides a formal legal basis if they are required to do that. But as we've seen in this outbreak, for the vast majority of people, that is not required. And in a sense, given we've got all of these people, they are in daily contact, I'm confident they will do what's asked. We're just making that clear without there's no doubt that is an expectation and requirement on them.
But is the communication strategy likely to employ this more often?
It's not so much a part of the communication strategy, because indeed even the requirements that went out to the school community through each of the letters that went out, because they had been asked to do that by a medical officer of health, that was in a sense a legal requirement that was on and that underpinned the expectation on the school community. And as we saw, the vast majority of people wouldn't have known, even if there was a Section 70 notice in place, they were asked to do it to help control the pandemic.
I think if we just take a step back, the general provisions we've worked through and operated by here in New Zealand over the past year are by and large very well understood. And some of the issues that we've experienced very recently have actually been things like breaches of level 3 requirements, which are generally very well understood. Now, what we want to make sure is that we are providing every opportunity to share as much information about the requirements on particular people, especially if they may have been in a place where there's been potential contact with a COVID positive case.
So,
Henry,
do you agree with any of the comments you made about the various cases and the rule breaking over the last 7 days, or are you totally comfortable with
No, I've consistently stood by what I've said, and I will continue to do so. However, I did also say earlier in the week that not at any point have I been under the view that anyone has done anything deliberately. I do not believe that. I don't think anyone's deliberately gone out to act against advice or instructions or to create the situation we're in. I don't believe that for a moment, which is one of the reasons I haven't seen merit in continuing a back and forth on some of the particular cases.
The pandemic is obviously just such a new environment. Everything is evolving. We're learning all the time.
Yeah.
This lockdown feels very frustrating because it could have been avoidable. Like we've had breaches of rules, we've had communications issues, there's been contact tracing issues. So what have you learnt from this lockdown in particular? Well,
actually, one of the things I'd reflect on is, and I've said this the last couple of days, we have never had a scenario through our COVID-19 response, which by and large, as a country, the team has done exceptionally well, but we've never had an experience that's been perfect. So in August, we had some quite significant breaches, relatively widespread ones. They weren't always canvassed in as much detail. In part, it was probably because it was larger. There wasn't so much focus on individual cases. And so the point I've always tried to make is that as a team, We've gotten through all of those scenarios too, and we will continue to do so. But the most important principles for our COVID management have been sticking together, people supporting one another, not turning on one another, and making sure that we're reminding everyone of those basic rules and principles, even if the variants we're dealing with change up around the edges what we need to do.
Prime Minister, could I
Yeah, go
make
ahead.
a comment there as well? This is an outbreak in the South Auckland community. The last time this happened, we had 170 cases last August. This time we've had 15. And I tend to be a glass half full person, but in this case I think it's 98% full. This community has responded, and the school in particular, this is a large college. The reason we have got around this outbreak so quickly and successfully is because of the way the community responded, and I really hope we can focus on that. It was the quality of the communication and leadership within the school and the positive response of the vast majority of people in that community, and even those who may not have followed instructions, I don't believe deliberately set out to actually cause any problems.
I'll come to 5:31.
With Auckland going down to level 2 at 6 o'clock Sunday morning, many of our Pacific community will be wanting to get to church to praise God.
Yes.
They have got to stay under 100.
Yes.
Will the police be able to?
I think certainly what we'll be asking, all of our community leaders, and certainly this is something our ministers have worked really hard on. They've got really good community contacts now. They can very quickly communicate information. We'll be wanting to convey that, yes, those meetings will be, congregations will be able to come together, but that limit of 100 is really important, and contact tracing is really important. We have had experiences in the past where it hasn't always been easy to contact trace in congregations. So we'll be getting that message out to our church leaders. Please make sure when you gather you do so safely, and we're here to support you in any way we can.
What's the benefit
Gina.
of hindsight? Do you still believe it was the right decision to pull Auckland out of lockdown after that 3-day Valentine's lockdown?
Yeah.
Or would you do it differently this time around, knowing what you know?
Oh, well, actually, no, I absolutely feel that was still the right response, because if you look back at what happened, unfortunately, the breach that occurred that set off a chain of events, albeit not a deliberate one, actually happened under level 3. So we were right to be in that precautionary period at that time. It's just unfortunate that we had a breach. We then didn't have a disclosure to contact tracing, and it went from there.
Yeah, are you going to apologise to KCL?
Again, as I've said, look, while I stand by what I've said, I've never believed and never ever claimed that anything has been deliberate here, and nor have I ever wanted to see a pile-in on anyone. I've always said we need to create an environment where people feel they can come through and get tested, because we rely on that.
Kia ora, good afternoon. This is a Checkpoint special, and we're just cutting away from the Prime Minister's press conference there. If you are just joining us, the situation is this. Auckland will move to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday, and the rest of the country will move to alert level 1. That decision will be reviewed by Cabinet at the end of next week, with a view to moving to level 1 across the country at the start of next weekend, if we're able to do so, said the Prime Minister. Now, being at alert level 2 will carry us through that 14 days of the infectious period for the last cases in the community, she says. The reminder is that alert level 2, and obviously coming out at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, that gatherings need to be limited to 100 people or less. The Prime Minister reminding anyone intending to go to church on Sunday that those restrictions will remain. And she says that decision is based on the fact that they have no new cases for the past 5 days in a row. They are confident that this is a single cluster, and they have managed to contact 6,000 people in relation to this cluster. There has been excellent testing numbers, she says, and all close contacts are contained. Well, joining us now is disease modeller Sean Hendy. Sean, what do you make of that decision, going to level 2 in Auckland 6 a.m. Sunday? Do you agree?
Yeah, look, I think it was probably the obvious decision to make. We went to alert level 3 when we didn't really understand the source of the new case that was discovered last weekend, and over the course of the week, I think we've got a handle on that cluster, and especially with the very, very high testing rates that we've had this week, that will give them some confidence that the cluster is contained and that they do have the right people isolated. So under the plan that government has, moving to alert level 2 is the right approach at this point.
Yeah, so yesterday there was 11,400 tests carried out, and over the last week they tell us they've processed 69,000 tests, so very high numbers.
Yep.
But what's outstanding in terms of what we don't know, with people yet to be tested, and also the gym, which is obviously a particular focus for them at the moment?
Yeah, and so that will still be a concern. I think it's also important to remember that the incubation period of this virus can be up to 2 weeks, and so it's possible for someone to have been exposed last week. They could have tested negative this week, and then they could go on to develop the disease this coming week, and could go on to spark another cluster. So the risk doesn't go completely to zero with this move, and it is important that we all stay vigilant. Particularly people in Auckland, and people in Aucklanders who are perhaps saved up travel and are going to leave in the next few days to for whatever reason, should behave as if they're on alert level 2 when they're outside the Auckland region.
So, well, they still don't know where this has come from, right? Their position is that they've locked everyone down who are close contacts, but obviously the Director General of Health is taking some extra precautions with issuing that particular health order.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important to do. I mean, we have seen that the setting for this cluster has been a particularly difficult one to work in, and I think one of the factors that made it difficult was the school. You've got a lot of very large number of casual contacts in the school, and we did see transmission within the school. And then we saw other settings that are high risk. We saw the gym and another educational institution, MIT, and so yeah. I mean, I think it's important that we're all cautious, and it is good to see that the Director General is actually taking these extra precautions as well.
Given your concern around taking your alert level with you, should we have gone to a sort of halfway house? Because at 6 a.m. on Sunday in the Auckland region, you can still have gatherings up to 100, and that's a fair number of people. Yeah,
I mean, I do think that is potentially a concern. It's a calculated risk. Every time we move alert levels, we're taking calculated risks, and it does rely on a lot of us being sensible in our own behaviour. First of all, sticking to the rules, but also thinking, do you need to go to that event, and just being really aware of any symptoms you might develop. Don't go to events, don't go to work, don't go to school if you're ill at all. And if your symptoms are those that are associated with COVID-19, make sure you get a test.
Sean, would you be comfortable from Sunday at 6 a.m. to be in a room with 99 other people? Would you feel fine with that?
I would. I'd be really cautious, and I will be cautious about what I do on Sunday and the days after Sunday. Certainly, I think that's the responsible thing for Aucklanders to do. So I wouldn't be entirely comfortable with that. Nonetheless, there are people will have good reasons why they do need to get together, and we do have to accept that some degree of life has to go back to normal, but these are all calculated risks that we have to take.
While the government is moving us from alert levels in Auckland to 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday and the rest of the country to 1 at the same time, while they're doing that, they're padding in this extra week, right, which is to give us a full 14 days from the last contacts with potentially infectious cases. So what might you be expecting to happen during that week? Because we're not out of the woods yet, are we?
Yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of variability in the way that this disease can spread. We know that it's often spread via super spreading events, and so that has some counterintuitive effects. One of those is that some people actually don't go on to infect many other people at all. So in fact, 4 out of 5 people will infect no one else or just one other person. That's what the stats tell us, and it's that 5th person that can go on to infect a large number of others. And so I think what we can say at this point is we've ruled out a large super spreading event with the amount of testing we've done, with the fact that we have tested so many people. But there's still a chance that there's maybe one other infection out there, and of course that's what caught us last time with the original 3-day lockdown. That there was that one other infection out there that slipped through the net. And so it's still, I wouldn't say it's likely, but it's still possible that we have a small number of other infections out there, and that we could see a resurgence of this cluster in the coming week.
What do you consider a small number of cases?
So we, it depends on how vigilant we are. The really concerning thing would be if we just relax next week, we could see growth of a larger number of cases before we noticed. So it's important that we're, if we're all vigilant, that we catch any new cases quickly. So maybe 1 or 2. That would be, that would not be too alarming. If we miss those cases, though, with this variant, it's, a cluster has the potential to grow very rapidly, and we know with the B117 variant that actually once you get a large cluster developed, 30, 40, 50 people, it's very hard to contain at that point.
Sean, so basically you're politely telling us to keep our foot on the gas and follow the rules. But here's the thing, given that there's been 50 days, do you have any concerns that people are getting fatigued and complacent, and they might think that this last lockdown, well, it wasn't needed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a concern. We're in this for the long haul. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccination program has started, and that will give us some protection from these failures at the border. But it is, it's a long battle, and we just can't let our guard down. So it's certainly a concern that maybe people are maybe complacent, and I just advise people to check out the news from overseas. People over in many countries have had a long struggle, much tougher than the one that we've undergone here. So it's just important to remember that while things are tough in New Zealand at the moment, they could be a lot worse if we let our guard down.
Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate your time. That is Professor Sean Hendy, who's from Auckland University's Research Centre, Te Punaha Matatini, and he is obviously a COVID-19 modeller. Now, just to recap, if you're just joining us, Auckland goes to Alert Level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday. The rest of the country goes to Alert Level 1 at that same time. Now, the Prime Minister has said that Cabinet will review those decisions at the end of next week with a view to moving the entire country to Level 1 at the start of next weekend, if there is nothing untoward that happens in the meantime. However, she is warning people in the Auckland area that Level 2 brings with it some conditions. Maximum numbers at gatherings are 100, stressing that she was because 6 a.m. Sunday, when that alert level drops down, some people will be wanting to go to church. Businesses can reopen, but they're being reminded around the physical distancing rules and hospitality. The 3 rules for hospitality, which is a single server and seated, and also obviously no more than 100 people at venues there. So that is what is happening at 6 a.m. on Sunday. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is in Papatoetoe, which has been the centre of this latest cluster. Nick, what's the reaction been to the news?
Hi Lisa, well look, I was standing outside Hunters Plaza in Papatoetoe's main street on Monday. I'm here again today. We've spoken to probably 5 or 6 people, and I can tell you that people are absolutely jubilant. They are so chuffed about going back to level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday. There was one chap in particular who I spoke to. He owned one of the mini sari shops in the main street of Papatoetoe, and as you can imagine, he is amped to get back trading on Sunday. He's been through 4 lockdowns already. He has lost so much business this year, and so can't wait to open his doors again. Says it will, though, take a few days for him to get properly back up to speed.
And obviously you've spent a bit of time out there in the past week. Do people have any lingering concerns?
Yeah, Lisa, there was one person in particular we spoke to who thought it was simply too soon. Part of the reason he thought it was too soon is because you would have seen during the week there's been a lot of coverage of people not sticking to the rules, of some of the families involved perhaps not making the disclosures that they should have. So this particular gentleman basically wanted to see all of those sorts of things cleaned up, make sure we have really got things under control this time before going back to level 2. He actually said that he would prefer that we stayed in level 3 as we are at the moment for a little while longer yet. So certainly still some trepidation, it would be fair to say. But Lisa, I've got to say, for the most part, we've spoken to 5 or 6 people. For the most part, people are absolutely delighted. This particular community has been hit really hard, big family groups obviously in this community, and you know they can't wait to see each other come 6 a.m. Sunday onwards.
The other thing is there is a concern that, you know, complacency might creep in, and I'm not suggesting in the suburb particularly that you're in, but just generally. We are still at alert level 3 until 6 a.m. on Sunday morning. I'm seeing the footpath around you's pretty clear of people. So does it look like, for all intents and purposes, that people are sticking to that level right now that they are in until Sunday?
Certainly, Lisa, I think they are right now. I mean, a lot of people we've spoken to still haven't even got the news. They're still catching up with it. But, you know, I think when we first went back into this lockdown, as you already mentioned, I was out here earlier in the week. Monday, it was still pretty busy. As the week sort of progressed, it has seemed that people have started sticking to the rules a lot more. You know, whether or not people will stick to that through to 6 a.m. Sunday, I suppose it remains to be seen. But certainly they have shown a tendency as the week's gone on to sort of say, all right, everyone, come on, let's just get this done and then we can be out again, hopefully.
Any opportunity, I know there's not that many people on the street, which is a good thing, we should say. Any opportunity to talk to any students? Because obviously Papatoetoe High School was at the centre of this, and those students have had to learn from home, and that presents a number of difficulties and challenges, doesn't it?
It does, Lisa. We haven't spoken to any students yet, but we have spoken to a lot of them throughout the week. And you know, the school from home thing, although maybe it gives them a little bit more leeway in terms of not having the teacher hovering over them all the time, most of them actually say they prefer to be in the classroom. You know, they prefer to be engaging. One of the main things, obviously, is that they prefer to be hanging out with their mates who they haven't been able to see in recent times. So, as I say, Lisa, haven't spoken to any, but from what we've heard during the week, they will be itching to get back into the classroom itself.
Thanks, Nick. That's our reporter, Nick Trubridge, who's in Papatoetoe, and he says the overwhelming response there of the people that he's spoken to is they're absolutely rapt at the prospect of dropping down a level by 6 a.m. Sunday. Now, so, alert level 2 for Auckland, 6 a.m. Sunday, but the Director General also made a health order today at the press conference with the Prime Minister, and this is significant because it basically puts more requirements and restrictions on a certain subgroup of people, obviously in order to keep a tight rein on people who have possibly come in contact with infected individuals. So it is a direction under Section 70 of the Health Act, and we'll just recap that for you. And it is any person who attended City Fitness at Hunters Plaza. Now, this is on 2 particular days, the 20th of February and the 26th of February. And if you look on Places of Interest on the Ministry of Health website, it will tell you the exact hours that they're talking about. But it's 2 particular sessions at that City fitness gym at Hunters Plaza. Anyone who was there at those times specified and have already been contacted by Auckland Regional Health Services, they're supposed to stay put, as are close or casual plus contacts who have been contacted by Auckland Regional Public Health Services. They're being asked to comply with the instruction to isolate at home, to report for a test and undergo medical testing as specified by the Medical Officer of Health, and to isolate until further direction. And this is obviously so that they can still keep a number of those more significant contacts ring-fenced and prevent mixing in the community, even when we go to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday in Auckland and in the rest of the country to level 1 on Sunday. Now, the reasoning for the decision, the Prime Minister says, no new cases 5 days in a row. There has been excellent testing numbers, she told us at that press conference. All close contacts are contained. There's about 6,000 people who have been contacted by health services over that particular time, and 69,000 tests processed in the last week. Now, 250,000 doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine destined for Australia have been blocked by the Italian government. And we will go to that story now.
Developing vaccines is all about the science. The rollout is very political, as the European Union oversees a lacklustre inoculation program. It's now playing hardball, and Australia is collateral damage.
There was always a worry that vaccine nationalism would rear its head.
Aditya Goenka is a professor of economics at the University of Birmingham.
And this is one of the first instances we have seen it where a country has blocked exports.
The Italian government and its new Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, don't want vaccine vials heading overseas. And under a vaccine transparency regime set up by the EU in January, governments can block shipments, a measure designed to ensure distribution commitments are adhered to by the manufacturers. Professor Goenka again.
Australia has signed a contract to get vaccines, but currently there's not a very high incidence of coronavirus in Australia. Italy has a very sharply increasing number of cases in acute care, so the number of people in hospitalizations is going up. How do you reconcile public health in your own country versus meeting your commitments is a complex issue.
The move threatens to heighten global tensions as nations scramble to vaccinate their populations. The EU has already been in a stoush with AstraZeneca after the company revealed it could not fulfil the whole European order on time. But on the other hand, Germany and France have led a campaign against the jab, initially saying it should not be used in those over the age of 65, but backtracking on that this week. Mike Rann is a former High Commissioner to the UK and says Australia's been caught in the middle.
This is not aimed at Australia. Basically, Australia's just collateral damage. I mean, there's a massive row going on within the EU and within individual countries inside the EU over the shortage of vaccine.
Simona Waiadu from the European Policy Centre says she's not surprised by the Italians' move.
If it was Australia prohibiting vaccine exports to Italy, would I feel angry about that? I don't think so, because it's like it's a world effort.
It's a worldwide effort where nationalism is very much at play.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she's raised concerns about this during her phone call with President Macron. She says now is not the time for acts of protectionism. Well, let's go now to Auckland Grammar Headmaster Tim O'Connor, who's just heard the news about the alert level drop scheduled for Sunday at 6 a.m. Tim, you can breathe out, can you?
Fantastic. Yep, a great step in the right direction. We can get students back to school on Monday.
And so, I mean, you're well versed in this, aren't you? How does it run at level 2 for you guys?
Oh, it's pretty now straightforward. So boys will return to campus on Monday as normal. They'll attend a form period rather than assembly. Assembly will be live streamed. then they'll move directly into lessons. We have one-way systems operating so that we're minimising numbers in certain parts of the campus. Hand sanitizer at all areas of the school, so regular application of that. Classrooms are all fogged, face masks on public transport, all of those sorts of basic alert level 2 health and safety procedures. We're just sending out all of that detail to parents now.
Are the classes, you say no assembly, but are classes normal numbers or do you thin them out at level 2?
Where we can, we do. Otherwise, it's separation of desks into single files as far apart as we can possibly get.
So, okay, you're back. It's been a bit of a start, stop to the year. How difficult has that been for students to kind of get into the swing of things?
Yeah, we've been going 7 weeks, or we've just finished 6 weeks. So we've had 1 full week of online and 3 days 2 weeks ago on online. So look, it's disruptive. There's no doubt about it. Getting students out of routine means it's really difficult to maintain motivation levels. Losing face-to-face contact with boys also makes it more difficult. And look, some students do really well in online and love it. Some find it really, really difficult to be motivated. But what we needed is for them to be in routines. So we've done that in a variety of ways online. So every day we've run an online assembly out to our community so that it's sort of a regular 9 o'clock start, keep some structures in place, then move into their 7 lessons of the day.
So, Tim, is there any catch-up to be had as a result of this?
That's not our plan. We've talked to boys and parents right through these last 5 days that no one is to be left behind. All of our students today received a checklist of all the work that needed to be submitted and completed over the last 5 days. And we've just put out a message to parents now and to boys saying, make sure you've got those checklists and make sure you've got evidence that the work is completed if you haven't already submitted it. And you come back on Monday. There's a small transition period to make sure everyone's up to date, and then it's move on.
Good to talk to you, Tim. That is Auckland Grammar Headmaster Tim O'Connor there. Let's talk now to Michael Baker, who's an epidemiologist from Otago University. Michael, we're moving down 6 a.m. Sunday to level 2 in Auckland. Do you agree with that decision?
Well, kia ora. Yes, I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, this outbreak has always behaved more like a chain of transmission that should be manageable with contact tracing. Obviously, there was some bad luck at one point with the extent of the school outbreak that has put a strain on that system, but we're not seeing any evidence of transmission in the community from unknown sources.
In saying that, we've still got outstanding tests, haven't we? So including ones from the gym, which is obviously an inside venue and maybe closer contact than people might normally have. I mean, are you worried about those outstanding tests?
Not particularly. I mean, partly because a large number of tests have come back already from people in that setting and have been negative, plus the high volume of testing in the community. So I think all the signs are very positive at the moment.
So what is all of this down to the fact that we went into a level 3 lockdown in Auckland, do you think?
Well, I think the system now is that if you suspect there's transmission in the community, you don't know where an outbreak's come from, we basically have to assume the worst, and that it's more like the Auckland August outbreak last year, and there are chains of transmission we can't see. This is behaving much more like a border failure that caused a chain of transmission, and those outbreaks are manageable with contact tracing in normal circumstances. But this outbreak had a few extra problems or challenges thrown at it, which I think has obviously pushed it back into being a harder one to contain.
Because after 5 days of 0 cases, I'm sure some people will begin to question whether we should have had the lockdown at all. Was it warranted?
Yes, well, I think it was justified here because there was concern that there was a chain of transmission that couldn't be explained. But as it turned out, it was explainable. It was part of that chain of transmission. And so in hindsight, it wasn't necessary, but that wasn't known at the time.
Do you still anticipate that we will get some more cases?
I think it's possible, but again, the source of these cases is known, so the contact tracing system is very good. It's very highly developed now, and it should be sufficient to stamp out any remaining cases if they occur at all.
So we're told, obviously, this particular strain is, well, it's highly transmissible, yet it doesn't seem to have translated in reality to this particular cluster. Why might that be the case?
Well, because it's unpredictable, and we know that about 20% of cases are responsible for most of the onward transmission. So sometimes you get good fortune and the cases they're not highly infectious and they don't go to large indoor events, and so they don't result in many secondary cases. And in fact, most of the transmission happens in households, which was what happened here. So that's when you have good luck, but you can't count on that. Occasionally you will have bad luck, and that's what happened in this particular series, and that's why we do need those alert levels.
So the Prime Minister has said Cabinet will look at the alert levels again next week. What would you think we need to see in order to allow the whole country to go down to level 1 next weekend?
Well, it'd be obviously no evidence of onward transmission from any of these identified cases. So we always have to be aware of the incubation period. It can be up to 2 weeks. We're always looking backwards. That's the reason why you need time to get a sense of the extent of every outbreak.
So would you be comfortable if there are no new cases that we can't attribute to this cluster? You think it's okay next week to go down to level 1, not too soon for Auckland?
No, I think the timetable that's been outlined is very realistic in this case.
Really appreciate your time. That's Michael Baker, who's an Otago University epidemiologist. If you're just joining us, obviously, Auckland is dropping down to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. Sunday. Rest of the country goes to level 1, and that decision will be reviewed nearer the end of next week. Now, we're going to go to our political reporter, Katie Scotcher. Oh, I don't know if we've got her on the line. So I'll bring you up to date with some other details out of the press conference. When we drop to level 2 on Sunday, that's at 6 a.m, you'll still be restricted in gathering sizes. So in Auckland, no more than 100 people at social events. And that's obviously going to apply to churches too. The Prime Minister made a point of emphasising that. And businesses can reopen. Obviously, physical distancing is still required, and hospitality can open but abide by those rules. No more than 100 people, need a single server, and for people to be seated. Now, the reason for this decision has been presented by the Prime Minister as no new cases 5 days in a row. There's been excellent testing numbers, she said, in the past week, and they've contacted about 6,000 people associated with this cluster. And we'll go now to our reporter, Katie Scotcher. Katie, we heard at the press conference that the Prime Minister has been having a conversation with President Macron. What came out of that?
Yes, they talked briefly about the Christchurch call, but she made the point that obviously speaking to international leaders globally, everyone is grappling with COVID-19, and she reflected on that internationally, compared with countries overseas, we are in a very lucky position. With this latest cluster, we've been dealing with cases in the double digits compared with other countries that have been dealing with cases in the thousands. So made some brief remarks there and then made the announcement that I think many people in Auckland have been waiting for. The lockdown there will be lifted 6 a.m. Sunday, and at that point the rest of the country will move to level 1, and then next week Cabinet will review those settings at the end of next week, and at that point they're hoping that, all going to plan, Auckland will be able to join the rest of the country at alert level 1.
What do we know about the mechanics of this Cabinet meeting? Because the interesting thing today was there was a couple of clusters. There was a cluster of earthquakes, and then there was the Valentine's cluster. And so obviously government would have been dealing with these two competing situations. What do we know about the Cabinet meeting and what they saw, and whether there was any dissension?
Well, obviously the Cabinet meeting started at 2 p.m. and by that point it would have been probably around halfway through. All of the tsunami alerts would have been lifted, so I can imagine that probably would have taken a bit of weight off their plate there. But they were considering all the numbers that we've got this week, and a major factor of that was that we haven't had any community cases in the last 5 days, which was a major thing that they were considering. But also the close contacts and the close plus contacts and all of the different the contact categories. They were considering how many tests have come back from all of those different categories and how many have come back negative versus positive. And obviously we know we haven't had any more community cases in the last 5 days. And considering all of that and the number of tests that have been done, it's I think almost 70,000 since the start of this cluster. They were confident that Auckland could move down alert levels.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Scotcher, our political reporter, joining us there.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Auckland is moving to COVID alert level 2 at 6 on Sunday morning, and the rest of the country will go to level 1 at the same time. Cabinet met this afternoon to decide the alert level change and discuss the civil defence response to today's earthquakes and tsunami. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the alert level moves will be reviewed by the end of this week.
Cabinet has made the decision to move Auckland to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday and the rest of New Zealand to level 1 at 6 a.m. on Sunday. So that brings us to the conclusion of the 7 days that we set out from the very beginning.
Jacinda Ardern says the decision was made after no new community cases were found for 5 days in a row. The tsunami warning issued this morning has been officially cancelled. Thousands of people in Northland, Bay of Plenty and the East Coast have now returned home after fleeing to higher ground. The mass evacuation was prompted by 3 massive earthquakes off the coast of New Zealand this morning. GNS Science says based on ocean observations, the beach and marine threat has now passed for all areas. However, it says strong and unusual currents and unpredictable surges will continue for another 24 hours. It says people should be vigilant and take extra precautions at the beach or in the water. Relieved Waipu residents are back home after a long day perched on the hill watching for tsunamis. The owner of the New Zealand Post Centre, Lynn White, hosted a number of evacuees at her house, which overlooks the water. She says she is thrilled nothing eventuated from the tsunami warnings.
As the warnings kept coming, we were sort of all a little bit hesitant about going anywhere, so we were all up there watching the water as intently as we could, as along with about 30 other people in their cars up in Cullen Road, having a look out and staying safe. Brian made us a batch of biscuits, fresh biscuits, and so it was good. It was good, but our house was open to anybody who needed to come up and use any facilities or anything.
The principal of Tolaga Bay School says the first tsunami alert in the early hours of the morning was a good dress rehearsal for the second. Nori Parata, who is also the Deputy Civil Defence Manager for the town, says they made the decision to close the school at 5 o'clock this morning, shortly before the first warning was lifted. She says since most students and parents had been awake since 2:30, they left it in place.
There's about 300 at school, so, we would have been pushing it in those circumstances. So, and boy, was I glad that we had made that decision when the second alert came out.
Nori Parata says the Tolaga Bay community was well prepared, with marae and kura well stocked with water and food. Fire and Emergency has addressed confusion over why some local fire station sirens did not sound this morning in the wake of evacuation warnings. Volunteer firefighter Chris Beard from Tokomaru Bay, north of Gisborne, says the sirens didn't sound to wake people up. Fire and Emergency says alerts related to earthquakes and tsunamis are managed by local civil defence and the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA. In Tairawhiti, they are not connected to fire sirens. It says people should not expect to hear their local fire siren during a civil defence emergency. The Minister for the Government's intelligence agencies, Andrew Little, has defended their monitoring of threats against Muslim communities. A 27-year-old man charged with threatening to kill worshippers at the Linwood and Al Noor mosques appeared in the Christchurch District Court today. A member of the public first alerted the police to an online threat made against Christchurch mosques. Mr Little says the security monitoring team looks at millions of posts daily. He says after a lead was provided to the police, intelligence agencies helped to ensure a person appeared in front of the court. A geyser of water higher than a two-storey building has erupted on a central Wellington street after a road repair crew hit a pipe. A spokesperson for Wellington Water, Alex Van Parson, says the small service pipe in Marjoribank Street, Mount Victoria, was punctured at about 3 o'clock. He says repairs should be completed in a couple of hours. It's 4 minutes past 5. The America's Cup sailing can go ahead and fans will be back in the stands when the COVID-19 alert levels change on Sunday. Felicity Reid reports.
The racing between Team New Zealand and Italy's Luna Rossa for the 36th America's Cup on the Waitemata Harbour can start on Wednesday. The best of 13 series was delayed while Auckland was at alert level 3. The move to alert level 1 for the rest of the country allows crowds at Sunday's international cricket doubleheader in Wellington between the Black Caps and Australia, followed by the White Ferns and England. Spectators can attend the Super Rugby Aotearoa game between the Crusaders and Hurricanes in Christchurch on Sunday evening, and the final Constellation Cup netball game between the Silver Ferns and the Australian Diamonds in Christchurch. This is Felicity Reid.
The White Ferns are defending another modest total in their second T20 Cricket International against England. New Zealand have posted 123 for 9, batting first in Wellington. Chasing 124 to win and seal the series with a match to spare, a short time ago England were 40 for 2 in the 6th over. The former Phoenix captain Stephen Taylor is returning to the Wellington club for the remainder of the A-League football season. The 35-year-old is currently in quarantine in Australia and could be available for the Phoenix in 2 weeks. Lydia Ko is tied for 6th, 2 shots off the lead after the opening round of the latest LPGA golf event in Florida. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, political commentator Claire Robinson's foray into playwriting is a provocative work about the first Labour Prime Minister Michael Joseph Savage. Isabel Allende on the unfinished business of feminism. And Matthew Remsky on the weird alliance between right-wing conspiracy theorists and left-wing utopians. Conspirituality, he calls it. I'm Kim Hill. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
The short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine spells, isolated light showers becoming more widespread later tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa mostly fine. Norwesterly gales for Wairarapa later tonight. Scattered rain late tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington including Taranaki and central high country. Fine spells, isolated light showers. Norwesterly gales about Wellington developing overnight, easing later tomorrow morning. A period of rain tomorrow, possibly heavy and thundery for Taranaki. Nelson and Marlborough fine tonight. Norwesterly gales for Marlborough later. Rain overnight followed by showers. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland rain or showers with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered showers at times, norwesterly gales about Canterbury High Country tonight. Possible thunderstorms about southern Canterbury and North Otago tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain tomorrow. RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's been an extraordinary day with the government and health and emergency services dealing with 2 clusters. Auckland's community COVID cluster and a decision on whether to shift alert levels. We'll have more on that shortly. The second, a cluster of 3 significant earthquakes, the strongest a magnitude 8.1. Whole towns on the East Cape and Northland were evacuated today after the quakes and subsequent tsunami warnings. For the East Cape, the alert to move to higher ground came in the middle of the night. It meant widespread disruption for most of the day. Schools and businesses were closed and communities gathered on hilltops to watch surges of water burst in. Our reporter Tom Kitchen and camera operator Samuel Rillstone sent us this report from Tolaga Bay.
A national warning, tsunami threat to land and marine areas message has been issued.
a tsunami is possible, please refer to our emails. To hear your message, please press 1.
A middle of the night wake-up call. For people in coastal areas of the East Cape, it was a 2:30am message to head inland. Richie says the rocking from the earthquake was pretty frightening.
Pretty mind-blowing, really. It was like a washing machine. I headed for the hills straight away, jumped into my car, stayed up there for half an hour or so, maybe a bit longer, then came back. Then we got a warning on our phones, like, say, head for the hills. It's, what's the point? It's a bit late by then.
Zach Horomina agrees it was a bit of a rude awakening.
Yeah, it was a bit of a fright, and we all headed out to the marae. As we do, we always got food out there. Freezer's always got plenty of meat in it, and the cupboard's always full, so we put on a breakfast out there.
When the alert came through, Tolaga Bay's Civil Defence Controller Greg Shelton says he was ready to click into gear and launch into action.
Everything just rocked and rolled, and immediately everybody got into action, as we know what to do.
Residents all across the east coast hurried out of bed in the dead of night and headed for safety. Tatia Kutia is the Civil Defence Coordinator for Whangara, which is between Gisborne and Tolaga Bay. He says it's been a long day for people there.
We got up here this morning at probably just before 3 o'clock with the first tsunami warning, and we sat up here in the dark till about, it was about 3 hours, and everyone sort of went home and might have been just getting some sleep, and then we got the alert again and had to come back up. So everyone's tired, but everyone's positive, everyone's patient. It's been good.
Further north in Tokumaru Bay, the town turned out on high ground to watch a huge surge of water sweep into the bay. The waves hit the bay about 11:30am, the impact of an 8.1 magnitude earthquake. By mid-afternoon, the alert was over and people were allowed to head home. Greg Shelton says it's been a surreal experience for the community. While the alert's over now, Mr. Shelton says people have to keep their wits about them.
This would be the closest we have had to an extreme event. We've talked about earthquakes and we know about the Hikurangi Trench. It's right up there.
And what does that mean for the community?
It gives us all a really big wake-up call. We know that it's going to happen one day. It very nearly happened today, and look, it could happen tonight, who knows?
Nori Parata is Greg's deputy and also the principal at Tolaga Bay School.
We closed the school. We we had a meeting and we decided that there may be aftershocks, and because the school's only 100 metres from the shoreline, we decided that it was probably in everyone's best interest to not tempt fate, and so we made the call to close the school at about 5 o'clock this morning.
She says the local kids have had a memorable day.
Heightened sense of alert, and so we're all being vigilant and we're all loving seeing each other and enjoying that moment. Great moments for catching up with people you haven't caught up for a long time. But as this day has gone on, when I did the checks out at those areas that I talked about, you could see the spirits were starting to flag a bit and they were sort of starting to get over it. They actually thought I had come there to say that they could go, but really I was there to try to keep their morale up. But they understood. They were just going to dig deep. They knew that they had to do whatever it took.
We're here at the Tolaga Bay Wharf, one of the most famous parts of the Tairāwhiti region. This is where locals were forced out today, and now the beach is free to go on. They had to evacuate earlier on because of the threat, but now it's safe. But locals are fearing it could get worse. They're just not too sure what's going to happen. In Tolaga Bay, for Checkpoint, ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
Communities in Northland were also told to head inland into higher ground. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe filed this report from Whangarei.
Tsunami sirens in Padua Bay and Whangarei heads an eerie warning for locals in this coastal community to dash to higher ground. The tsunami warning for Northland came after 2 earthquakes near the Kermadec Islands, the first a magnitude 7.4 and the second a monster 8.1 shake. People from Cape Reinga to Whangarei were ordered to high ground immediately. Among them residents in Whangarei's Onerahi, where it had been a long morning for some, including local Yvonne.
It's been quite long because I started work at 8 o'clock and I left there before 9. And we're down Port Road, but we live just down the bottom of the hill on Beach Road. And so I had to come racing home at 100 k's because I knew my husband and cat were at home without a car. So I had to come home and save them, and we've been here ever since, meeting all these new and lovely people from our district.
Officials warned tsunami activity would last for several hours, keeping residents here away from their homes for some time. But despite people's itchy feet, the mood remained jovial.
Are you bored? And getting to the point where I'm desperate for a pie. I thought you were going to say pea. That too.
Meanwhile, some were gutted the tsunami warning had scuppered their plans for the day. William Saunders had been preparing to head out from Papatoetoe.
I was getting my flounder gears ready, go for a flounder, but not now.
Others were far less concerned about the wait for the waves, with schools in the danger zone ordered to evacuate.
We were there for an hour and then we had to get picked up because of the tsunami, and because of that, a lot of parents were also picking up their kids, so half the school wasn't there, and I think our school's getting put into lockdown, and then we just came home, and then we packed our things and came here.
Many here are already prepared with supplies in the face of the country's fight against COVID-19. Instead, Jade Puru's civil defence kit is being broken out for another reason.
So we already have an emergency kit on standby anyway, just because of COVID, so we prepped ourselves for that. It's all set up in here, got our drink bottles, water bottles all done. So yeah. So we're not pretty worried, just go with the flow.
You're set?
Yeah, we're set, yeah.
And while some here in Onerahi are in high spirits, others are concerned for their coastal neighbours.
Well, worried about relations and other people along the coast is probably what we're worried about, and making sure that they can go to high ground and be safe and get out of there if they, really. If they're by the coast, then they should move now.
Michael Chubb is the Chief Fire Officer at the Onerahi Fire Brigade. Nearby Rorimu Avenue School evacuated here with plenty of other residents who were keen for a cup of tea or coffee.
A bit tense with all the children around at the station and trying to keep them busy and occupied and fed. We're just cracking barbecue out, and supermarkets donated some meat, I think, some sausages. So that should solve that problem.
Further south at the Brindurwin Hills, the race to get out of town turned into a scenic traffic jam, with everyone keeping an eye on the ocean while they waited for the standstill to clear. The wait dragged on and on, with everyone pitching in to help.
I'm walking around offering people water while we shelter from whatever's about to happen.
But then, around 1:35 this afternoon, another alarm came in, this time signalling that sirens were being turned off and the evacuation was over.
We're allowed to go home.
It's all clear to go home. Yeah, it's pretty rip. Dogs will be happy.
Are we going home? Yes. Perfect, yes. Be safe. Stay safe.
So how have the past few hours looked for you?
I'm good, all right. We're all right. I'm glad it's over and we're off home.
Civil defence teams packing down from what was a happy ending to a hectic day. For Checkpoint, Cornita Blakeperson, aho.
And if you were listening to Nita's piece or Tom's, we will put the videos up online so you can check them out on our Facebook page. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the program, we'll touch base with an Auckland principal about how the latest lockdown has affected students. Now, Auckland will leave lockdown and drop down to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday. The rest of the country will move to level 1 at the same time. The decision was made following news there are no new cases of COVID-19 in the community for the 5th day in a row. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet will review the alert decision at the end of next week, with a view to moving Auckland to level 1 at the start of the weekend.
Now, being at level 2 for this period will carry us through to roughly 14 days since the infectious period for our last cases in the community. There is, of course, a chance that we'll see additional cases. And that's why we continue to place requirements on those who still need to be in isolation. And it's also why we are at level 2 in Auckland.
But in the meantime, under alert level 2, it will not be business as usual for Aucklanders.
Please keep your distance from other people when out in public, including on public transport. And if you can't maintain a physical distance of 2 metres, we do encourage you to carry a face mask or face covering with you. If you are sick, stay at home. Don't go to work or school and don't socialise. This protects you and it protects your whānau.
Social events will also be limited to 100 people. Ms Ardern says over the next few weeks she will set out a roadmap for the country, particularly around certainty over the vaccine delivery. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, today issued a legal direction under Section 70 of the Health Act for those who attended City Fitness at Hunters Plaza at the same time as one of the COVID community cases. It also applies to anyone contacted and advised they are a close plus, close or casual plus contact and are still needing to be tested.
I require them to do three things. To isolate at their usual home, first. Second, to report for and undergo medical testing for COVID-19 at a time and place specified by a medical officer of health. And third, except as required to undergo such testing, to remain isolated until they receive further direction from a medical officer of health.
Dr Bloomfield says 10 people who attended City Fitness are yet to receive a test result, but 8 have already had a test or are in the process of getting one. Another 2 can't be found, but officials are tracking them. There's now been 4 Auckland-wide COVID lockdowns plus a 2-day stay-away order for the city's CBD in November last year, meaning the super city has taken a significant financial and cultural hit, at times resembling a ghost town. Well, joining me now is Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Phil, the Prime Minister said today sometimes you feel like the country's having a run of bad luck. Do you feel that way too?
Yeah. I sort of this morning when I got the news about the potential tsunamis and then 3 earthquakes, I thought, my God, it'll be locust next. But look, you kind of do feel a bit put upon until you pause for a moment and you reflect and you think of all of the other people around the world that are in a much worse situation than us. And you know, when it comes to the crunch point, we've had the tragedy of 25 deaths, but other countries are now, the United States talking about 500,000 deaths. So by and large, we've come through it pretty well, both in health terms and economically. But that's not to minimise at all the cost to people in some sections of the community. When we run into level 3, there's probably 250,000 people that can't work across Auckland, and that impacts on incomes, it impacts on jobs, it impacts on businesses. So am I glad that we're going back to level 2 on Sunday morning? I sure as hell am glad.
So how long is it going to take for this city to bounce back? Because at various points, seriously, tumbleweed down the streets of Auckland.
Yeah. Well, I come into work during the lockdown because of the role that I need to play, and you look out over your city, and it does feel like a ghost town. Look, I think we can bounce back, but I think there are some lessons to take from it. And one of the lessons, surely, is in terms of the vaccination, which we all know is the way in which we can break out of this pandemic and be safe. I think that the case has been made that when we get to the general rollout of the vaccine, it's the city that was at such risk that it was put into lockdown or level 3 restrictions 4 times now. We are the ones that need to get that vaccination available to us first, and probably particularly starting in South Auckland.
Is anyone listening to you when you say that? Have you spoken to the Prime Minister directly about?
Yes. I've made that point pretty clearly, and I think I heard her say at a certain point that particularly South Auckland, that's where you'd want to look at prioritising the vaccine rollout when we've dealt with the people that have the particular risks, the comorbidities, when you've dealt with the healthcare workers, etc. I think the fact that we have been in level 3, that's a reflection of risk, and where do you roll the vaccine out first to the people that are at most risk, and that's us. And if you protect Aucklanders, then that protects the disease being spread out into other parts of the country. It also means that it's the part of the country that is affected most economically by going into level 3, and that has implications for the GDP of the whole country and the economic well-being of the whole country as well. So it's not just us being us first. It's all about us. It's about a logical, rational way of doing it. You deal with the people most at risk first, and by dealing with that risk, you help the whole country.
That could still be 10 months to a year away. And do you have any concerns that people have developed new habits, Phil? They're working from home more now. They're going to local cafes, not into the city. Your CBD could still be empty a year from now.
Yeah. Look, and I'm not about to tell people that they shouldn't eat locally or that if they can work at home, they shouldn't work at home, because both of those things make sense from a variety of perspectives. But I'm in my office here looking out at a building that's 39 stories tall. It's called Pacifica. It's just been completed. It's soon to be occupied, and it's occupied by people that will fill apartments on every floor of that building. There are more people moving into the city centre. The city centre is always going to be important. It's a place people come to for cultural events. It's a place where people come to for their education. We've got the universities here. So, look, I'm not despondent about it, but, of course the city centre is going to take a hit when you don't get the cruise liners in, when you don't get the international tourists in because there are none coming, when you don't get the international students in, when 2/3 of them end up coming to Auckland, and when people, do get into that habit of, my God, it's lockdown, maybe we're safer at home, we will get past the feeling of, you have to be at home to be safe once we get on top of the problem. And I hope it's not going to be 10 months, Lisa. I hope that by the end of this year, we will have substantially vaccinated the majority of people willing to be vaccinated in this country.
Phil, just before you go, it is, the buzz has gone off for the weekend for many people, but we're still in lockdown. Don't come out till 6 a.m. Sunday in Auckland. So what is your message to people?
I put it in my press statement there. We're at level 3 until Sunday. So, Friday tonight and Saturday night are not a good time to go partying. We've got this far. Don't ruin it. Let's make sure that we be precautionary. It's because we've been precautionary, because we've moved strongly and quickly, because most of us have followed the rules, that Auckland and New Zealand are far better off than almost any other country in the world. We know what requires us to be safe. Let's continue to follow those rules and all of the other rules that I don't need to repeat because people should know them backwards by now. So look, it's have night at home with your family tonight and tomorrow night, and from Sunday, you've got that extra freedom to go out and enjoy yourself, but remembering still we're at level 2 for probably another 6 days.
Thanks, Phil. That is Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. The decision to drop down alert levels is good news for those in the events business. The first America's Cup race will start shortly after 4 p.m. next Wednesday, the 10th of March. Under COVID-19 alert level 2 or 1, the race schedule will remain as planned with 2 races per day, Wednesday 10th, Friday 12th, Saturday 13th, Sunday 14th, Monday 15th and each day after that. In Wellington, tickets have already gone on sale for Sunday's cricket double-header. The Black Caps are playing Australia at midday and the White Ferns will face off against England at 4 p.m. As well as that, the Silver Ferns will be able to sell tickets and have a crowd at their game on Sunday in Christchurch. There'll also be crowds for the Super Rugby match between the Crusaders and Hurricanes in Christchurch on Sunday. We are keen for your feedback. What do you think about the change in alert levels? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. While the early morning got off to a hell of a shaky start and there was no respite, with thousands of coast dwellers sent scrambling for the hills, it was a cluster of a different kind, 3 significant quakes. The first striking at about 2:27 a.m. and the largest maxing out at magnitude 8.1 off the Kermadec Islands. The serious rumblings prompted a tsunami alert and a call for people throughout Northland, Bay of Plenty and the East Coast to move to higher ground where they were forced to stay for several hours. While joining me now is GNS senior scientist Graham Leonard. Hi Graham, what is actually going on out there near the Kermadecs, do we think?
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me on. Good question. This is large earthquake activity related to the plate boundary. So we've got the Pacific plate and the Australian plate pushing together offshore of the North Island and all the way up to Tonga. And every now and then we have large earthquakes along that plate boundary, along that ring of fire around the Pacific. And this morning we were busy. We had 3 large earthquakes, and culminating in that largest 8.1 up in the Kermadecs, and as you said, that led to emergency management putting out a tsunami evacuation message for several areas because it did generate a tsunami, and there was concern it could be a damaging tsunami.
Graham, so are they all interconnected? Did one incident trigger the others, or are they separate things, if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the way it works with large earthquakes was within the region of a large earthquake, you definitely have stress put on faults nearby along that plate boundary as well. And so very close to that East Cape event, we would have said, there's definitely stress there. Now, these events number 2 and 3 are actually quite a long way further up in the Kermit axis. So we're looking at that closely now just to see how much stress there is there, but they certainly happen very close together in time. And
so what's your theory, Graham?
They're definitely being driven by the same process. So this is all the Pacific plate pushing into the Australian plate. So they're all from that force that's driving that plate boundary for sure.
So how often or how common is an earthquake magnitude 8.1?
They're not that common. So our seismologists haven't seen quakes this big up in this region in the last decade or two, especially not a sequence like this. So we're going to learn a lot from this. This is quite unique in terms of the way you've jumped from one quake to a second and third, and hundreds of aftershocks when you look locally around these quakes as well. So there's a real opportunity to learn from these rare events, and they're not that common at all.
So what could you learn? What secrets could it reveal to you?
Well, it gives us a lot of information on the way those fault planes are set up under the ocean, and the ones under the ocean we're particularly interested in, obviously for tsunami. So every time we get some of these anywhere in the world, our seismologists and our earthquake modelers, the wave modelers who understand how fault lines lead to tsunami, can improve their models and improve the ability next time to say perhaps how big or how fast a tsunami might arrive close by here or even on the other side of the Pacific through, for example, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Centre.
So, Graham, are we going to be shaking for a little bit longer, do you think?
Look, the aftershocks are rolling on. We'll see more aftershocks from East Cape, which are likely to be felt. There'll be more aftershocks up in the Kermit. The most likely scenario, we've just popped a story up on the GeoNet website there talking about future scenarios. The most likely scenario, very likely, is we'll see smaller aftershocks. Can't rule out tsunami from those, but smaller earthquakes. It's very unlikely to see one of this size, and we're saying extremely unlikely to see a larger one, but we can't rule that out. So the key thing is people need to stay vigilant. The most important and fastest message is still long or strong, get gone. If it's longer than a minute or it's hard to stand up, people need to evacuate immediately because potentially every minute and every metre can count there. And they need to stay tuned into civil defence. So civil defence channels, and especially those emergency mobile alerts, provide that message in case the tsunami has come from an earthquake further away where you didn't feel it very well. But do not forget that long or strong, get gone message. People who evacuated overnight on feeling that long or that strong earthquake did exactly the right thing, and they're to be commended.
You touched on this, Graham, but the first thing that pops into people's heads when there's a cluster of earthquakes is the big one coming?
Yeah, exactly. Good point. We have aftershock forecast models, and we look at those probabilities, for example, in the next month. And the very likely scenario in that, and you can listeners can go to GeoNet after this and look at that story. The very likely scenario is a smaller aftershocks only in the next month, but there is an unlikely 15% or less chance of a similar-sized earthquake, which may or may not generate tsunami. And there's this extremely unlikely chance, based on these types of earthquakes around the world and our aftershock models, 1% or less chance in that next 30 days of a larger earthquake. So you can never rule it out, but it's unlikely.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is GNS senior scientist Graham Leonard there. A man charged with making threats to kill worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques was remanded in custody after an appearance in court this morning. The man is accused of posting on a website popular with far-right groups that he planned to use car bombs to kill people at the Al Noor and Linwood mosques on the upcoming anniversary. Rachel Graham has more.
The 27-year-old man made a brief appearance in the Christchurch District Court this morning. He didn't apply for bail and was remanded in custody until his next appearance in 2 weeks. The man was also granted name suppression. Police are not revealing details of the nature of the threat, but a cached version of the 4chan chat shows a plan to use car bombs to kill more people than were killed in the 2019 attacks. Abdagani Ali, the spokesperson for the Muslim Association of Canterbury, says they were quickly notified of the threat by the police.
The community has mixed emotions at the moment. Some people are in shock and some people are coping with it the best way they can. This was not only a threat to the Muslim community, but a threat to the New Zealand community as well. So there's a lot of non-Muslims as well that are concerned about this issue, but the New Zealand police have done a great job in identifying this risk and arresting those involved.
Imam Ibrahim Abdul Halim was the Imam of the Linwood Mosque on the day of the attack in 2019. He's now Canterbury University's first Muslim chaplain and says it is hard to grasp that some people still misunderstand the Muslim faith.
We are not against anyone. We love everyone. We need to put our hands with everyone. Why people use us like that? It is. I'm really very sad, Yani. I'm really very sad.
Mr. Harlem says he is now in two minds about whether it will be safe to attend the upcoming memorial event planned to mark 2 years since the mosque attacks. A spokesperson for the Islamic Women's Council, Anjan Rahman, says the threats are very unsettling for the Muslim community, but she's glad that they were reported to the police quickly.
I understand there's a group of people, volunteers who do have accounts in some of these spaces and are watching what's going on, and they referred this to the police.
The Minister for GCSB and NZSIS, Andrew Little, has defended the issue being raised by a member of the public and not through monitoring by the authorities. He says intelligence work is always dependent on leads.
We do not have a system where every person in New Zealand is monitored. We don't have a system where the entire internet operating within New Zealand is monitored. When there are threats like this, we pick them up because people in the community are aware and alert and report it to the authorities. What we need to know is that the authorities are responsive and have the capability to respond. That's what happened in this case.
Friday prayers went ahead today in Christchurch as usual, with no obvious additional security measures in place. The police say there was always intended to be heightened security at the upcoming memorial service, which will mark 2 years since 51 people were killed. In Otatahi for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the impacts of weeks of home learning for Auckland students and how the city's church leaders are helping their communities. And it's not by fleeing the city. We would love your feedback, particularly if you're in one of those areas that were evacuated today. Let us know how things went for you and what the experience was like. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
COVID alert levels are coming down on Sunday morning. Auckland is moving to alert level 2 and the rest of the country will go to level 1. The decision's been made by Cabinet, who met this afternoon to study the COVID situation and discuss the civil defence response to today's earthquakes and tsunami warnings. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the decision was made after no new community cases were found for 5 days in a row. The tsunami warning issued this morning has been officially cancelled. Thousands of people in Northland, Bay of Plenty and the East Coast have now returned home after fleeing to high ground following 3 massive earthquakes off the coast this morning. GNS Science says the beach and maritime threat has now passed for all areas. However, it expects strong and unusual currents and unpredictable surges to continue for another 24 hours. A GNS seismologist says the risk of this morning's large earthquakes triggering more seismic activity on mainland New Zealand is relatively small. Bill Fry says while the 2 huge quakes near the Kermadec Islands are linked, it's harder to find a link between them and this morning's shakes off New Zealand's east coast. The head of New Zealand's intelligence agencies says the arrest of a Christchurch man for making threats against the Muslim community is an example of the security agencies and public working well together. A 27-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing on charges of posting threats to kill on the 4chan website. Andrew Little says the Royal Commission into the mosque attacks made it clear the authorities rely on good information from the public. The 13 parties charged by WorkSafe over the Whakaari White Island eruption have made their first court appearance. The 2019 eruption killed 22 people and seriously injured many others. Last December, just before the first anniversary of the disaster, WorkSafe announced it was laying charges over alleged health and safety breaches before the eruption. Lawyers for the 10 organisations and 3 individuals have appeared in the Auckland District Court, but no pleas have been entered. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, my food bag, you say, well, it tanked on debut.
Yeah, this is news I will not let be buried by the tsunami news. We did have the biggest share float in 7 years today when my food bag listed, having raised about, well over $300 million. But its start on the NZX was very much lacklustre. By my calculations, about $30 million has been wiped off the value of this company today. That's gone, finito, disappearing into thin air. That's as demand for the company's shares when it began trading at 11 o'clock. Just we're not there. Its share price closed down about 12 cents or 6.5% to $1.73. That's compared with its issue price of $1.85. And you just sort of have to wonder if some of the questions that were raised about this company and its valuation when it announced it was going public have really sort of stuck in the minds of investors, because straight out of the gate, the company was given a hefty valuation, just shy of about $450 million. And the questions that journalists and investors had was whether the huge growth that the company saw over the past 12 months, in particular during the lockdown, as people showed a real reservation to go out and buy their groceries, preferring to opt for these food delivery services, whether or not that could be sustained, and furthermore, could the company grow from there in the future. And the other question was about the plans for the money that the company raised through its initial public offering. Most of that went into the pockets of the long-standing shareholders who are selling down their stakes, which makes you think, is there really a vote of confidence in the company itself? I did speak to the chief executive of my food bag today, sadly before the company went live, so his comments do stand in stark contrast to what's transpired. But putting today's trading aside, for him and for the company, today really was truly momentous. Since it's been founded in 2012, my food bag has really flirted with the idea of going public. It's been working towards this for quite some time now, and I just got a sense when speaking with the chief executive that there was some disappointment that the company and its senior leadership team couldn't partake in the usual festivities that come with listing on the NZX. That's because of the lockdown restrictions, so there's no confetti cannons, no champagne, no ringing off the bell at the NZX office in downtown Auckland. When it comes to what's next for the company, well, the chief executive of my food bag says, the past few months have been intensely busy, getting to this state. Now the team, they're looking forward to getting back to business and focusing on its operations and growing the company from here. And now that my food bag is publicly listed, well, we can look forward to bringing you more updates about its performance in the future.
And you bring good news, well, it is for farmers at the very least, dairy farmers.
Yeah, well, quite significant news really, but the dairy giant Fonterra has raised its forecast Farmgate milk price payout for the current dairy season for the second time in as many months. Now, the cooperative now expects to pay farmers between $7.30 and $7.90 per kilogram of milk solids. That's about a 40 cents increase on the previous guidance it issued back in February. And get this, if the co-op does pay out the midpoint this year, that's about $7.60, that would be the second highest payout in Fonterra's history. Now, the company chief executive, Miles Hurrell, he says that the revised payout is due to the bumper result in the fortnightly global dairy trade auction earlier this week, which saw prices jump by as much as 15%. He says there has been strong, consistent demand for New Zealand dairy products from the Asian markets, but in particular from China, and as its economy has really reopened in recent months. But Miles Hurrell, he did caution the market that the final payout, it could be to the lower end of the payout range that it's provided, mainly because the European and the US markets, they're heading into their dairy season, so there will be more milk supply coming to market, increased competition, that could hurt the payout in the future. But the economic impact from this the contributions we're seeing from the dairy sector are really quite significant. More than $11.5 billion will be pumped into the economy through payouts to farmers this year. So that is quite a significant contribution.
And Nicholas, before you head off, a quick whip around the market.
Yeah, sure. The NZX was down by about 44 points to 12,180. The dollar was trading at 71.7 US cents and 93 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. Auckland students have missed months of classroom time due to COVID over the past year, with about 250,000 children being taught from home this week as Tamaki Makaurau enjoyed Alert Level 3. It's again raised equity issues, with some families struggling to access devices and internet connections. Add to that the need to play catch-up and keep kids engaged after a rocky start to the year. Massey High School Principal Glenn Denham joins me now. Glenn, were you huddled around your radio or whatever device to hear the announcement?
I was huddled around radio, every device I could get. Can I just say that there are delighted teachers and principals who can't wait to see our kids, but probably more delighted parents to send their kids back to school. So it's a great announcement, and we can't wait to have our kids back.
How much of a challenge has the week been?
Do you know what, Lisa? It's got better and better. This is our fourth try and a fourth attempt. Each one's got better. We've had high levels of engagement, but my associate principal, Carol Bashford, shared something with me. She said there's a thing called the Stockdale principle after Admiral James Stockdale, and what you've got to do is have faith that in the end we will prevail, but you've got to embrace the reality and the truth that confronts us. And will there be a lockdown at Rahui 5? I think so. But you know, we've got to relax. We've got to prepare. We must be better than we were this last time, and so it's just part of it. But it's not something it's just come as I dare say, slightly the new normal. But you know, we've had higher levels of engagement, but still, kids without devices around New Zealand, that's still an issue, a real concern.
So for your school then, in terms of devices and internet connections, does everyone have what they need?
No, 517 kids without devices and a connection. So what we've got is like a lot of schools are in our situation, we've got hard copies out to our parents, and can I just congratulate all the teachers and all the parents that engaged in distance learning, and also with hard materials. We weren't the only ones. But what I can't be is in 20 years' time being the old principal's home and saying, do you remember 20 years ago when the government gave us all our kids' computers? Yeah, we call it the great one-off. Here's the issue for us, is that those computers, and can I thank the Ministry of Education and the Minister for those computers, we are enormously grateful, but they'll become obsolete in 2 or 3 years, but poverty's going nowhere. So, you know, this is going to be an ongoing thing. This cannot be a one-off. So we must set something out in place that kids coming into schools will have a device so they can participate and they can get the benefits of online learning.
Do you think you're going to have to, play sort of catch up in any way for the week that you've had this week?
I think every school will. I think, yes, we will. You know, no matter, I refuse to believe that that distance learning is better than a teacher, kanohi to kanohi, as we say in Māori, you know, eye to eye, that a teacher in front of a student will always be the best way and for kids to learn. So there will be catch-up. But I think, you know, around the country, particularly, you know, I know our primary colleagues are working hard and so on secondary, but we feel pretty confident, Massey, that, you know, we've got some really good things in place, but we'll check in with our kids. Shame on us in New Zealand if we don't get all the secondary schools and primary schools together and say, what's worked for you, what's gone really, really well. We check in with our kids and say, what worked for you. If we don't do this over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and shame on us. You know, we should be sharing as much of the best practice as we can. So, you know, we can do it.
So, Glenn, you're talking about a bit of a review. Are you a nationwide review or stock take?
Absolutely, 100%. I think it's one of the things, hopefully the ministry are going to say, right, what worked well, we should all contribute, you know, send a survey around what did you do and what worked really well and what did the kids say. I think that's imperative in the next week or two, and then get it back in the week later and just send it out, say, hey, this worked for kids, this worked really well. Because if we don't do that, I mean, there's 500 plus secondary schools here, you know, we're best together. You know, we're best combined as one big school. But you know, so that's important. But can I also thank everybody in New Zealand, because you made it possible. That team of 5 million for our kids to come back to school on Monday, always people that got checked and stayed safe, and we just can't thank you enough.
Glenn, do you reckon you're going to get a full turnout on Monday? People are going to get the message and rock up to school, or will some people still stay away?
That's a brilliant question. I think we won't get our attendance usually sort of over 93% for the whole school. I don't think we're going to get that. I think there's still will be some trepidation. What I tell all the parents that are listening today, or kids, school is safe. Dr. Bloomfield, our Prime Minister, has said, look, we've got to get back into school. We want to see you. Just to check in with you, to see if you're okay and how's it going and check in, but we need you back at school, and that's really important. It's a slow drag sometimes for kids, particularly, those in all schools, maybe some more so in low decile schools. Schools are safe. We can't wait to see you, and we're ready to have you.
Fantastic, Glenn. Lovely to talk to you. That is Glenn Denham, who's from Massey High School. It is 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And after 6 tonight, the Anglican bishop ready to roll up his sleeve to receive the COVID-19 vaccine as he calls for church leaders to step up. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200 or any dollars at all. And that's the message from Southland's Mayor to Destiny Church leaders, Hannah and Brian Tamaki, whom he says are not welcome in his region. Gary Tong says if leaving Auckland under the cover of darkness to avoid the level 3 alert level wasn't bad enough, revelations that Brian Tamaki avoided lockdown to go on a hunting trip in Te Anau is doing his head in. It comes as the couple fronted for 2 radio interviews at the same time last night. Brian Tamaki was here on Checkpoint. His wife, Hannah, was on Magic Talk, but it was only afterwards we found there were 2 very different versions of events. Matthew Tunison has been listening to both.
Speaking for the first time since First Up revealed their late-night exodus to Rotorua to avoid Auckland's week-long Level 3 lockdown, Hannah and Brian Tamaki finally fronted for interviews last night, albeit with very different versions of events. Brian Tamaki, who calls himself an apostle, told Checkpoint's Lisa Owen that like 9,000 other Aucklanders, they were legally entitled to do so and had important business outside of the city.
I'm in the people-changing business, and for me to carry on my people-changing business, which I'm into, was very important for me to be able to carry on that, because I had previous bookings around the country.
But speaking to Magic Talk at exactly the same time, Hannah Tamaki was on the phone to host Ryan Bridge, offering a very different explanation.
If people actually check our Facebook page out, they'll see that Brian hunts in Te Anau every March. And when we started seeing this, he just moved his hunting forward because he always said, I'd rather be out in the bush. That's something that we had decided we would do at the last one. And when we heard it, we thought, well, look, let's go. We'll go earlier. Brian had packed up the buggy to go hunting, loaded in the dogs, threw the suitcase in the car, and we went to Rotorua.
The couple left Auckland after Saturday's Level 3 announcement, arriving in Rotorua just after midnight and hosting a church service there on Sunday morning. And while Auckland was in Level 3 and Rotorua following Level 2 rules of no more than 100 people, the couple were confused about how many people were in attendance. Here's Brian Tamaki with Lisa Owen.
There was less than 20 spaced in Rotorua, so though you were wrong.
There were less than 20, did you say, at the gathering?
There was less than 20, 25 people at the most at that gathering.
And here's Hannah Tamaki with Magic Talk's Ryan Bridge.
We only had 100 people in a 500-seat auditorium.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, expressed surprise the Tamakis had travelled the length of the country in just a few days.
You know, whether it's the Tamakis or anyone out of Auckland, the request of them has been clear that actually they should be minimising their interaction with large groups of people. And in fact, there should not be large gatherings anywhere in the country.
The couple are still in the South Island, Hannah revealing she's in Christchurch while her husband is now on a hunting trip in Te Anau, before they meet in Invercargill for a church service on Sunday. Southland's Mayor Gary Tong was in no doubt how he felt about their visit to the region.
They're not welcome due to the circumstances. They're just not welcome here, and the way they left Auckland under cover of darkness, really, it's not good. But, yeah, no, the whole thing's disappointing.
Mr Tamaki told Lisa Owen that while Destiny Auckland had claimed more than $90,000 in wage subsidies, lockdowns have been bad for business.
Aucklanders are a bit tired about being locked down, jeopardising our businesses. And
Is that why you left?
Well, no, we've got a government...
Was it jeopardising business, Brian?
Exactly, the economy. And you know what, it's coming
your
through
business
the borders.
Specifically, though, Brian, was it jeopardising your business too?
You know what it does for the whole country.
But Gary Tong was shocked to learn that his business was actually a hunting trip.
That's actually quite a worry. Like Tianau's it's really down at the moment, and to have these people up in that area is just not on. The people up there are suffering with their businesses. They're waiting to hear when the COVID levels are going to be lifted, and now we've got somebody from Auckland just blatantly wandering around up there. That's just does my head in, actually. They haven't come down here on a business trip. They haven't come here for any essential work, that's for sure.
Mr Tong was beginning to get messages from Southlanders who also didn't want the Tamakis coming to town.
I've had a call just in the last quarter of an hour in regards to it, and I don't think it'll be the last one. I don't think people actually realise that this couple are in our community now and have travelled irresponsibly from Auckland to Rotorua down to here. I just find it absolutely disappointing.
And what was the nature of that call?
They found it unbelievable that they were in our area when there's been no sign of COVID in the South Island, and it's certainly in the Auckland area. So that's telling you that we need to do exactly what the caucus and the Prime Minister are telling us to do, and to behave. And I'm sorry, but I find it absolutely disappointed, for want of a better word.
Brian and Hannah Tamaki say neither of them will be getting the COVID vaccine. Hannah told Magic Talk's Ryan Bridge she was confident she wasn't infected.
I haven't got COVID. I've had my test and I'm negative. I'm negative,
When
Brian.
did you have your
if
test?
they got it, they didn't get from me. And the other thing
When
is,
was your
all of
test?
the people in the church, 6 weeks ago.
The couple also launched attacks on the media yesterday and threatened to take legal action against journalists who covered the story, labelling them a modern-day lynch mob. As for the Tesla, the couple told their flock at Saturday's service they were gifted. They wouldn't disclose who the generous donor was.
Somebody who obviously wanted to give us the Tesla, handed the keys over and said, "Would you like this? We want to give it to you as a gift." Well, I wasn't going to turn it down, would you?
Call Matthew Tunis on TNA.
Meanwhile, the Auckland church community say the actions of Destiny Church leaders leaving are wrong and the couple should be leading by example. Church leaders say they're offering online church services and ongoing support to parishioners with concerns about the upcoming vaccination rollout. Louise Tanuth reports.
The actions of Hannah and Brian Tamaki, fleeing level 3 lockdown and also revealing they won't be vaccinated against COVID-19, is causing a stir in the Auckland church community. Papatoetoe's been at the centre of this most recent COVID-19 outbreak. Father Matthew Varakei is the priest at Holy Cross Catholic Parish. He says his church is working with the community to address questions and concerns about the vaccination rollout. But the only way to support their community under Alert Level 3 is to stay put and check in.
For me, as a church leader, I will remain with my people and stay with the people, support the people, pray for them, be with them and call the people, especially in giving support to one another, caring for their needs in terms of food and basic necessities, mask and sanitizer.
In the city at St Patrick's Cathedral, parishioners are missing attending services in person. Father Christopher Denham says church leaders are setting an example.
All the clergy in the Diocese of Auckland, we are, as it were, sheltering in place. We are in our parishes and doing what we can there, whether that be offering things online or at least being there at the end of a phone if need be.
As for the vaccine, he's drawing inspiration from the Pope.
Pope and the Holy See have not merely encouraged people to receive the vaccine, but it's, for those who actually work in the Vatican, it's actually a requirement because it is care for others. It's not just protecting oneself, it's reducing the possibility of spread. Our policy will be very much to encourage people as far as possible to receive the vaccine.
Sarah's husband is an Anglican minister in Auckland. When they heard of the Tamaki's movements, they felt let down.
Just felt a bit disappointed, really. You should go for kind of best practice. Do not what's just good for you, but what's good for your neighbour.
During Alert Level 3, they've been checking in with the community, particularly those who work in hospitality and travel, cooking meals and recording an online service every Sunday. Sarah says for most of their church, the vaccine couldn't come sooner.
I think we're all really looking forward to there being a vaccine. people depend on other people getting vaccinated. We're in touch with lots of churches in the UK. When they can get back together, a whole lot of people will not be there. They've lost members of their community. They haven't been able to farewell. They haven't been able to have funeral. The opportunity to live in a place where we can vaccinate for things like this, we are so lucky.
While everyone's eager to get back to worshipping together once more, leaders have a clear message. Follow the alert level rules. For Checkpoint, Louise Tenuth.
And if you're just joining us, from 6 a.m. Sunday, Auckland will move to Alert Level 2. It means that whilst church services can go ahead, indoor gatherings are restricted to 100 people. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is in the heart of Papatoetoe's township and joins us now. Nick, what's happening there? Does everything still look like Level 3? I know this week's been pretty hard for people with children.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, actually, because just before you cross to me, there is actually a group of people crowding behind me, group of kids sort of hanging out and playing around a little bit. So maybe they need to, or the parents need to try and keep them in line and remind them that until 6 a.m. Sunday, we're still in Level 3. You mentioned this lockdown being hard for people, Lisa, and I'm standing at the old Papatoetoe mall on St George Street, and it was at this spot during the week, actually, that I was speaking to a young mother about her lockdown. She had 5 kids with her. She was saying this one has been particularly difficult. She's on her own with 5 kids, wondering how she's going to cope throughout the week. Was also talking about some friends living in boarding houses and the boredom that they face and the difficulties that they face, obviously living in a unit on their own. So I think, Lisa, it would be fair to say this one has been particularly tough.
Thanks, Nick. That's Nick Trubridge, who's in the Papatoetoe township there. The news of the alert level dropping down in Auckland from 3 to 2 has been welcomed by the Mayor Phil Goff, but a message from him is don't think that tonight and Saturday night are the time to go partying. He says, remember, we're still at alert level 3. Stay home and follow the rules is the plea from him.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata at the Auckland will move to Alert Level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday, with the rest of the country moving back to Level 1 at the same time. The Prime Minister says the decision was made after no new community cases for 5 days in a row. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
At the time Cabinet made the Level 3 decision, the most recent case, who went to the gym last week after being tested, couldn't be traced back to the other known cases. The concern was there could be further community transmission. Jacinda Ardern says that still could be the case, so the requirements on people in isolation will remain. There's also a health order in place for isolation and testing for people who visited the City Fitness Gym in Papatoetoe at certain times. Cabinet will review the situation at the end of next week, with a view to moving Auckland to Level 1 at the start of next weekend. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Epidemiologist Michael Baker says all the signs are positive that the current COVID-19 cluster is under control, but he believes the lockdown was justified.
There was concern that there was a chain of transmission that couldn't be explained, but as it turned out, it was explainable. It was part of that chain of transmission, and so in hindsight, it wasn't necessary, but that wasn't known at the time.
Michael Baker believes it's possible there will be more cases, but he says the contact tracing system is highly developed and should help to stamp out any new cases. Emergency management officials in Tolaga Bay are pleased with the rapid response from the community to today's double tsunami alerts. The Deputy Manager of Civil Defence, Nori Parata, says most people took themselves to higher ground when first quake struck off the East Cape in the early hours of the morning. She says by the time the second warning was issued around 8 o'clock, people were already on high alert. Ms Parata says Hine Mauria Marae, the Kura at Mangatuna and Kaioa Hill were all packed with people.
They were definitely prepared. They all had drinking water, they had barbecues, they've got roasts in the oven. So, while we all have a healthy respect for the alert that's on, but natural community instinct has definitely kicked in.
A GNS seismologist says the risk of this morning's large earthquakes triggering seismic activity on mainland New Zealand is relatively small. Bill Fry says the two huge quakes near the Kermadec Islands are linked. However, he says finding a link with either of this morning's two quakes off New Zealand's east coast is a bit more tenuous. Mr. Fry says while there could be other earthquakes around the Kermadec Islands, it's unlikely there'll be a bigger one. And he says there's no heightened risk of one in New Zealand.
There is always a potential to trigger an earthquake like we've seen today with these three earthquakes, but the likelihood of that happening is relatively minor compared to our overall hazard in New Zealand.
Bill Fry from GNS. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has spoken with her French counterpart about the progress being made in the fight against terrorism. In 2019, Ms Ardern and Emmanuel Macron led a group of world leaders and organisations that pledged to adopt the Christchurch Call, the initiative aiming to stop the internet being used as a tool for terrorists. But she says the phone conversation inevitably turned to COVID-19. Ms Ardern says with more than 26,000 new cases reported in France and 322 deaths yesterday alone, it reminded her of what people in other countries are going through. The head of New Zealand's intelligence agencies says the arrest of a Christchurch man for making threats against the Muslim community is an example of the security agencies and public working well together. A 27-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing on charges of posting threats to kill on the 4chan website. The Minister of the GSCB and the SIS, Andrew Little, says the Royal Commission into the mosque attacks made it clear the authorities rely on good information from the public.
Their recommendations really focused on making sure that the whole community was aware of threats and felt confident reporting leads to the authorities, and then the Royal Commission wanted to make sure that the authorities are capable of responding. All of that has happened in this case.
The Minister of the GSCB and the NZSIS, Andrew Little. A freshwater geyser is erupting outside a heritage-listed building in central Wellington after roading contractors hit a pipe. It's feared the geyser has damaged windows in a century-old heritage building on Marjoribank Street, designed by Thomas Turnbull in 1904, which is part of the Apollo Lodge Motel. Wellington Water's Ben Matthews says the pipe was damaged during work being done on roads and footpaths. He says water will need to be shut off during repairs tonight. It's 6:05. The White Ferns have suffered another loss to England in the second T20 Cricket International in Wellington. Chasing New Zealand's modest total of 123 for 9, England have sealed the series by reaching their target with 6 wickets and 16 balls to spare. Meanwhile, Australian captain Aaron Finch says it's nice heading into tonight's fourth T20 against the Black Caps with that series still alive. The Australians were 64-run winners in Wednesday's third match, also played in Wellington.
We had a really poor game one. Game two, we had some really good stuff. We were on the back of a Guptill hiding. We improved and were pretty good throughout the game. But all in all, 3 games that we've improved in each one, which is a really pleasing sign.
Aaron Finch. The Highlanders' assistant coach Clark Dermody believes they have an edge going into tonight's Super Rugby Aotearoa match against the Chiefs in Hamilton. The Chiefs had the bye in round 1, and while the Highlanders were beaten by the Crusaders, Dermody says the experience puts them in good stead. Tonight's game kicks off at 7:05. The New Zealand mixed martial artist Israel Adesanya says he's ready to create more history. The UFC middleweight champion moves up a weight class on Sunday to challenge for the light heavyweight title in Las Vegas. Just 4 fighters in the UFC history have held 2 belts simultaneously, and Adesanya isn't surprised he's attempting to become the 5th.
This is exactly, like you said, what I've always predicted to do in this game is change the game, change history. And I came in here just over 3 years ago, and look what I've done so far. And I got a long way to go.
Israel Adesanya. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life visits the Heathcote nursery that was ground zero in the Christchurch quake. Power performers Cora are this week's Friday Night Live act, recorded at the power station. Because Steinway & Sons was founded on this day in 1853, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to the piano. On nights, Tinkle the Ivories with me, Brian Crump. Afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
The short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine spells, isolated light showers becoming more widespread later tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa mostly fine. Norwesterly gales for Wairarapa later today. Scattered rain late tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taranaki and central high country. Fine spells and isolated light showers. Norwesterly gales about Wellington developing overnight, easing tomorrow morning. A period of rain tomorrow, possibly heavy and thundery for Taranaki. Nelson and Marlborough fine tonight. Norwesterly gales for Marlborough later. Rain overnight, followed by showers. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain or showers, heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered showers at times, norwesterly gales about Canterbury high country tonight, possible thunderstorms about southern Canterbury and North Otago tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain tomorrow. RNZ National, 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. 3 earthquakes, tsunami warnings and thousands of people heading for the hills. For residents of towns on the East Cape, the alert came in the middle of the night after an earthquake off the coast of Te Araroa. Later in the morning, the sheiks headed north. 2 earthquakes in the Kermadec and a warning to people in Northland to get out and move to higher ground. By lunchtime, the alert had passed and people were allowed to return home after hours waiting for surges to pass. Sarah Robson reports.
I'm just not sure whether anyone's home here. Let me just see. Have you heard the tsunami warning? So you need to just evacuate, eh? Okay, thank you. Rachel, you need to evacuate. There's a tsunami warning.
That was Far North Mayor John Carter on RNZ this morning.
The siren's already going here. The tsunami siren's already singing its song and alerting the village that there is a warning. And one of the things that this village has learnt is that when the tsunami warning goes off, then we evacuate. We evacuate up to a point at our school. Just excuse me, I just want to go and check that this neighbour's. Just bear with me. Sorry to be buggering around with your interview.
The call to evacuate up north came just before 9 a.m. after a magnitude 8.1 quake near the Kermadec Islands. It was the 3rd quake of the morning. The first, a magnitude 7.1, hit about 2:30 and was centred 100 kilometres off the coast of East Cape.
Jesus Christ, Bailey, stay. Shh.
Hawke's Bay woman Jodie Callahan began videoing when the shaking started.
Missy, come. Missy, come. Good girl.
Further up the coast, Opotiki Mayor Lynn Rystra.
Fast asleep, violent shake, and then I could hear the wall behind my head rolling and giving. Luckily, I'm in a wooden house that seems to roll well with the earthquakes, but it just kept going and going and going.
Hundreds of people up and down the east coast fled for higher ground, including Chris Beard, who runs the Foursquare at Tokomaru Bay.
So we went up the top of the Busby Hill. Much to my delight, half the town was already up there, which was great.
What was the atmosphere?
I think half the people thought it was party time, but are socialising early in the morning. And then the rest, there are a few people that we were just checking to make sure that everyone was accounted for and if anyone needed to shoot back down to the bay to pick anyone back up.
The tsunami warning was lifted at 6 this morning, but not even an hour later.
Just in the last few minutes, though, another major quake, 7.2 is the latest we have on it, has struck the Kermadec north of New Zealand. It hit at 6:40 at a depth of 10 kilometres is the latest information coming into us.
That prompted a second tsunami warning for the east coast from Bay of Islands to Whangarei. And then not long before 9 o'clock...
We've just been getting some breaking news. Corin?
Yes, we have a 3rd earthquake this morning, this one in the Kermadec, 2nd in the Kermadec. It is a magnitude 8 earthquake northeast of New Zealand near the Kermadec Islands.
Cell phones started buzzing with emergency alerts. People on the east coast of the North Island, from the Bay of Islands to Whangarei, from Matata to Tolaga Bay and Great Barrier Island, were told to evacuate to higher ground or as far inland as possible. Ian McDonald lives in Matata.
And at the moment it's just dead quiet. We're looking out at Whale Island and further around to the left. In fact, due north, we're looking at the sea and the sand dunes. So it'll be a magnificent sight if it does come over the top, but by God, I hope it doesn't.
Opotiki councillor Louis Rapihana was on a hill at Marae Nui between Te Kaha and Opotiki.
So the waves at first, when we first arrived, were quite small, but now it's actually pulling out quite a bit and then coming back in and creating bigger waves. If anything, the surfers would love it, but, it's not safe for them to be there.
And in the Bay of Islands, the chief executive at the Waitangi National Trust, Greg McManus.
We're all up the top of the Waitangi Golf Club with half of the population of Paihia, it seems.
How many people are we talking about?
It's really difficult to say, but I would say several hundred people. There's cars parked as far as I can see.
Just before 1:30 this afternoon, the National Emergency Management Agency gave the all clear for people to return home. The tsunami activity warning has been cancelled for all beach and marine areas, but people should expect strong and unusual currents and unpredictable surges for up to another 24 hours. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Auckland will move to alert level 2 at 6 a.m. on Sunday, while the rest of the country will move to level 1. Cabinet made the decision today after a 5th day in a row of no new community cases. Auckland's alert levels will be reviewed again at the end of the week, with the view to moving the region to level 1 next weekend. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Another COVID-19 alert level decision, but this time against a backdrop of a shaky day.
That it's hard not to feel like our country is having a run of bad luck when you have an earthquake, tsunami alert and pandemic to contend with all in one day.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet made the call to keep Auckland at level 3 until Sunday morning to see through a transmission cycle of what she describes as an unpredictable cluster.
That gives the chance of the majority of any positive infections to be manifest. You're always less likely to see them in that latter part, but we still want some level of restriction and caution in place. In our view, sticking with that full 7 days was the wise approach to take.
Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield says there is still a chance we will see more cases in this outbreak, but those people will be in isolation. And he's issued a health order making the legal requirements for these people crystal clear.
I require them to do 3 things: to isolate at their usual home, to report for and undergo medical testing for COVID-19 at a time and place specified by a medical officer of health, and third, accept as required to undergo such testing, to remain isolated until they receive further direction.
Dr Bloomfield says there are still some test results from gym contacts outstanding, including 2 people who are yet to be found. He says while they are less of a concern because they were from an earlier gym visit when case M wasn't symptomatic, officials are still hunting them down.
They will be found and they will be isolated and tested, and they will remain isolated until they receive their test result.
Jacinda Ardern danced around questions about whether this health order was necessary because of communication failures in this outbreak. And when asked whether she would apologise to Case L, who there's been debate over whether she went to work when she should have been isolating, Ms Ardern said she stood by her comments.
However, I did also say earlier in the week that not at any point have I been under the view that anyone has done anything deliberately. I don't think anyone's deliberately gone out to act against advice or instructions or to create the situation we're in. I don't believe that for a moment, which is one of the reasons I haven't seen merit in continuing a back and forth on some of the particular cases.
Ashley Bloomfield says while there's always lessons to be learned, he defended the handling of this outbreak and the community's response.
This is an outbreak in the South Auckland community. The last time this happened, we had 170 cases last August. This time we've had 15. And I tend to be a glass half full person, but in this case I think it's 98% full. The reason we have got around this outbreak so quickly and successfully is because of the way the community responded, and I really hope we can focus on that.
Ms Ardern says she spoke to French President Emmanuel Macron today. The conversation driving home the devastation COVID-19 is causing around the world. She says while she absolutely maintains elimination is the best strategy, she acknowledges it isn't easy.
And it is completely natural to feel fatigued. Thank you for pushing through once again. COVID has taken a toll on so many in so many ways, but it will get better.
Jacinda Ardern says over the next few weeks, she will lay out more of a roadmap for the year ahead, including the rollout of vaccines. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Anglican Bishop of Christchurch says he'll be getting the COVID jab when it's offered because protecting your community is the Christian thing to do. The comments are in stark contrast to the position taken by Destiny Church leaders Hannah and Brian Tamaki, who say they won't be vaccinated. In response, Bishop Peter Carroll tweeted a call for all Aotearoa church leaders to step up and make it clear they would take the COVID vaccine.
I think we all need to be vaccinated. We're not going to win as a country if we're not going to be vaccinated. And as a Christian leader, I would want to encourage Christians to particularly think about being vaccinated as part of our loving our neighbour as ourselves. In other words, it's a duty out of that love of neighbour to do what is best for our society.
Peter, can you explain that a bit more to me?
Well, I think as individuals we might be thinking, will I be vaccinated or will I not be vaccinated? And we may naturally have a number of concerns as an individual about whether or not to be vaccinated. But I think particularly I would say to all Christians, we believe in loving our neighbours as ourselves. That's a primary Christian value. And that should make us also think about being vaccinated in the light of care for our neighbour. And I care for my neighbour, I believe, if I don't get the virus. And one way to not get the virus would be to be vaccinated.
So helping your neighbour stay safe and healthy is the Christian thing to do?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why churches are particularly keen to follow other government guidelines around our meeting practice together, whether we're in level 3, 2, 1 or 4, and we see that as part of our obligation to care for the wider society.
So what difficulties does it present then when you have other high-profile church leaders coming out saying no thanks to the vaccine?
It's hard to say if it makes much difficulty for Christians who don't follow those leaders anyway, but when the media makes something of a high-profile leader saying no, that may have more ramifications than the person saying no would think about.
So what do you think the church's role is specifically around vaccines and the vaccine program?
I think our role is to encourage every one of our members to think deeply and reflect well on what it means to love our neighbour. I don't think giving an edict from the pulpit saying you must be vaccinated necessarily helps. That may even have a counter-reaction. But I think we can, from our pulpits and in other messaging ways, appeal to what it means to be a Christian, which is to love God and to love our neighbours. I would imagine about 98% of church leaders in New Zealand are very clear that being vaccinated is part of that duty of care for our neighbour.
So I know you're in the South Island, you're operating at level 2. How are you managing following the restrictions and still tending to your congregation?
We're managing as best we can. We've had a bit of disruption through the first lockdown that affected Ash Wednesday at the beginning of Lent and our services on that day. And on Sunday, I was personally involved in a service that would have been an overflowing church. We were reopening a church and we could only operate with 100 or less instead of about 350. And another couple of events around that were cancelled. So that's disruptive and difficult, but it's also part of being the team of 5 million.
So you're following the rules, regardless of the fact that it might create a couple of difficulties?
Every time the government changes the levels, I'm normally sending a message out to my diocese saying we're in level 2 in this case. Remember, these are our guidelines. We know what to do, and we need to make the changes accordingly.
And so in terms of that, in terms of following the messages from the government, sticking by the rules, if it be level 3 or level 2, in terms of the scripture, what does it say about following the rules?
The scripture is pretty clear that we are to follow the mandated authority, the government, in their directions to us. There's nothing that I've seen in what our government's wanted of us that in itself is against being a Christian. There are governments around the world, of course, which make life very difficult for Christians, and that's a very difficult thing to live with. But I see our government, and I think many Christians see our government as itself acting responsibly with a duty of care to our whole society.
I know people will ask, Peter, so that's reference to Romans, is it?
That is a reference to Romans chapter 13.
And that was Bishop Peter Carroll there. More history awaits New Zealand's reigning Sportsman of the Year in Las Vegas this weekend. Already the middleweight world champion, mixed martial arts star Israel Adesanya will attempt to claim a second UFC belt. The Nigerian-born Kiwi will move up a weight division to challenge for the light heavyweight title. As Clay Wilson explains, victory on Sunday would put Adesanya in a very exclusive company.
That is it! Wow! Still undisputed! Quick night at the office for the champion Israel Adesanya!
His last performance sent a message to all UFC middleweights. Now, with no obvious challenge in his natural weight division, Israel Adesanya is stepping up to be the challenger. Just 4 fighters in UFC history, including Irish superstar Conor McGregor, have held 2 belts simultaneously. Adesanya is not surprised he's attempting to become the 5th.
For me, this is exactly, like you said, what I've always predicted to do in this game is change the game, change history. And I came in here just over 3 years ago, and look what I've done so far. And I got a long way to go.
While Adesanya isn't shocked, those closest to him are still coming to grips with it. Head coach Eugene Berriman says it's hard to overstate the significance of Sunday's fight against Poland's Jan Błachowicz.
When I think about it, it bewilders me a little bit. I'm like, man, this is massive. This is absolutely massive. There's no comparison you can really make outside of combat sports. It's not like the All Blacks can go and win the Rugby League World Cup or anything, like they have the opportunity to possibly win 2 bouts.
Berriman says Adesanya putting his perfect 20-0 record on the line in a higher weight division speaks directly to his whole philosophy on life.
Let's take risks, let's challenge ourselves, let's go into uncharted territory and try and do what people don't think that we can do. It's a part of him cementing his place in history, part of him doing something that people think he can't do.
One person firmly in that camp is his latest opponent. Having finally claimed the light heavyweight title, 38-year-old Błachowicz isn't planning on giving it up in his first defence.
I try to knock him out, defend myself the best I can. I try to use my power, my weight to take him down or, just knock him out. We'll see.
Adesanya's teammates at Auckland City Kickboxing are certainly confident about what they expect to see. 8th-ranked flyweight Kai Kara-France and the highly touted Carlos Ulberg, making his UFC debut, are also in action at UFC 259. Ulberg says Adesanya is more than ready.
He's prepared himself for years for this moment. He's seen himself be the light heavyweight champion years ago. And it's nothing new to him. It's no surprise. It's no surprise to us.
Kara-France hopes to re-establish himself as a title contender on Sunday and says those ambitions are further fuelled by being alongside Adesanya.
He's so confident in himself. That's what makes him so dangerous. Even in the most stressful and dangerous moment, he'll always back himself. So this fight, he just can't get hit, and he just got to be on his toes the whole fight. There's no margin for error.
Adesanya is well aware of that, especially with Błachowicz on a 4-fight win streak, 3 of those coming via knockout. Most pundits are still predicting an Adesanya win, with plenty already talking about what he'll do next. The man himself is adamant he's taking Błachowicz seriously, but is also sure it won't be long before he joins McGregor in becoming a truly global star.
It's inevitable, but I just have to get used to it. You know, I just have to accept it and not hide from the role that I'm in, not hide from the platform that I'm on. Because a lot of people get to the spot and then they start to like, what did Kanye West say? Y'all can have it back. I just accept it now, and it is what it is. I am who I am, so I just run with it.
On the eve of his greatest challenge, Israel Adesanya is keeping that same confident energy. Moti hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
While a change in alert levels means Crowded House can actually have a crowded house when their tour kicks off next week in Christchurch. So let's end the show on a high note. Neil Finn joins me now. Are you excited, Neil?
Hooping and hollering at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Jacinda, bless her, made us wait quite a long time, but we're so happy, very happy to be back on stages.
Yeah, were you biting your nails sort of in anticipation? Because obviously everything was up in the air to the 11th hour for you. First concert Wednesday.
First concert Wednesday in Christchurch. It's a little, we've had to reschedule, but the whole tour is on, and we're even better rehearsed now than we were a week ago because we've had a few extra days. So, yeah, rearing to go, really excited to be able to play, and it's a great privilege to be able to do it in front of New Zealanders, you know.
So
fantastic.
What were you doing during lockdown? Were you Zooming each other and doing rehearsals or what?
Well, we were in a bubble. The band was able to maintain a bubble and do it quite legitimately. So we were able to keep rehearsing. We've got some extra little touches. We've made an intro tape. We've practiced some choreographed dance moves. We've got our costumes worked out. The whole thing's just, leapt into a new level.
So do you still like each other after being in a bubble at Alert Level 3 together?
We do, yeah, we're getting on really well. There's only the odd little skirmish about, getting in and out of choruses. It's not musical stuff, but we're intense. So you can hear them playing in the background. Can you hear that?
I can. Tell them to keep going. Loving it.
Could carry us away. Yeah, check it out.
That is absolutely brilliant. It's lovely to hear because the thing is, people have been deprived of that group pleasure of going and listening to music together. Yeah?
Well, we couldn't be more excited to be out there. Obviously, everyone's been hunkering down. New Zealanders have been incredibly inspirational and, from the top to the bottom. And we just need to go now and celebrate the freedoms that we have, but everyone's worked hard for, and we're happy to be a soundtrack for that. We really are.
You're going to bring it home for them, starting next Wednesday in Christchurch.
Yeah, we are. We can't wait.
It is fantastic to talk to you, Neil. Best of luck. Right. Have a fantastic tour. That is Neil Finn, who can hit the road now because of the alert level shift. He's kicking off in Christchurch on Wednesday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Auckland moving to COVID alert level 2 early on Sunday morning, with the rest of the country moving back to level 1. The tsunami warning issued this morning that saw thousands of North Island people moving to higher ground has been officially cancelled. The warning followed a series of huge earthquakes off the coast and near the Kermadec. Wellington Council workers have been dealing with a geyser of water higher than a two-storey building that erupted in a central Wellington street. The government's defended the monitoring of an anti-Muslim threat after a member of the public spotted internet activity by a man later charged with threatening to kill worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Thinking about it is always much worse than the actual experience, and often you don't feel a thing. I mean, these are very fine needles.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
He was a cult leader, he wanted everyone to call him Crumpy. He just had this way of sort of overwhelming people with his gigantic personality.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. I'm hoping it's going to be a nice, quiet night. A nice, slow news night. No rumbles in the night either, but I guess we don't really have any control over that. Our Sonic Tonic, because Steinway and Sons was launched on this day in 1853, is dedicated to the piano. Got lots of great piano tracks, all tracks featuring the piano coming your way after the news at 7. The 7:07 p.m. question, by the way, you're hearing it now at 28 minutes to 7, is tell us about the piano in your life.